So when I was going through my divorce last year, I had to pick up double shifts at the shop to keep up with child support. My kids stayed with me every other week, and I always made sure they had everything they needed. I had just gotten them new backpacks for school and tried to keep the fridge stocked, but with work running late every night, sometimes I missed stuff. That Tuesday night I realized we were out of breakfast stuff for the morning, and the store closed at midnight. It was already almost 11. I grabbed my keys and drove to the 24-hour supermarket down the street, just wanting to be in and out fast so I could get back before midnight. The lot was mostly empty except for a few cars scattered near the front entrance and a delivery truck idling out by the side doors. Inside, the fluorescent lights made everything look flat and quiet, almost sterile. There was a lady mopping the tiles near the produce, some night shift stockers stacking soup cans on the shelves, and one guy in a dark jacket walking slowly down the cereal aisle. He looked older, maybe mid-40s, with a beanie pulled down over his ears. I didn't think much of him at first. I was moving fast, tossing cereal boxes and juice packs into the basket, checking prices, texting my ex about allergy stuff for the kids. Every couple of aisles, though, I'd catch the guy out of the corner of my eye. He'd be staring at the labels or pretending to look for something, but he was always turning his head to watch me. I thought maybe he was just weird, or maybe waiting for someone else in the store. I grabbed a couple yogurts, some milk, and went to get bread. Again, the guy was right there, this time crouched near the bottom shelf, not picking anything up. He looked up, eyes meeting mine just for a second, then looked away. I tried to ignore it, kept going, but it was making me feel uneasy. When I circled back to get a box of snack bars, he was already in that aisle, standing at the end, arms crossed, watching me. I finally asked, "Hey man, do you need something?" He didn't answer. He just walked away, not even looking at me, moving a little faster than before. I figured that was that, and went straight for the self-checkout. It was almost empty, just one register open with a young girl scanning her stuff, earbuds in, not paying attention to anything. I finished up, scanned the groceries quick, and paid. My mind was on getting home, making sure the kids' lunches were ready for the morning. I left the cart at the door and walked out into the parking lot, the cold air stinging my face. There was nobody else around except for the guy in the dark jacket, who I spotted near the cart return, but I didn't make eye contact. I just kept walking toward my truck. I could see my F-150 sitting under one of the lights, but as I got closer, I slowed down. Something looked off. The truck was sitting lower than usual, and there was a shimmer of broken glass around the tires. When I got close, I saw all 4 tires were slashed, cut deep at the sidewalls. Both headlights were smashed, glass shattered on the asphalt, and I could smell the burnt, chemical smell of torn rubber. I stood there for a second, just looking at it, trying to process what I was seeing. My hands were shaking a little, not from the cold. I turned to look around, scanning the empty parking lot, hoping maybe it was just some random vandalism. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Not fast, not running, just slow, steady, almost like they wanted me to hear them. I spun around and saw 2 men stepping out from between the parked cars, maybe 15 feet away. Both were older, big, heavy coats, one with a baseball cap pulled down low. Each of them had a baseball bat in their hand, holding it loose at their side, not trying to hide anything. The guy from the store was one of them, same dark jacket, same beanie, his face blank and focused, looking right at me as they kept walking closer. I dropped the grocery bags and ran back toward the store entrance. My work boots slipped on the wet pavement, but I kept going. Behind me, I could hear them picking up speed, their footsteps getting closer and echoing off the empty lot. My hands were already numb from the cold, and I could barely feel the bags slip out of my fingers. The automatic doors seemed to take forever to open, and I practically fell through them when they did. The security guard at the front desk looked up from his magazine, saw my face, and immediately reached for his radio. He was a big guy, older, with a white mustache, and he didn't waste time asking questions. I tried to explain what happened, my breath coming out in short bursts, pointing back toward the lot. He locked the front doors with a big clatter, then picked up the phone and called the police while I stood there, watching through the glass as the two men stopped for a second, looked back at the building, then turned and walked fast to an old dark Suburban parked 2 rows over. The guy from the store glanced over his shoulder, not running, but not wasting any time either. The other man kept his head down. They climbed in on the driver's side. The engine coughed once, then started. The headlights flicked on, blinding in the dark, and I watched them drive off, turning out of the parking lot onto the empty road. The security guard let out a long breath and shook his head. He kept watching the lot for a minute, then told me to stay by the counter until the cops showed up. I was still shaking, sweat running down my neck even though my coat was soaked through. A few minutes later, 2 police officers came in, a man and a woman, both looking tired and annoyed at being called out so late. I told them what happened, tried to give them descriptions, but all I really remembered was the shape of the bats, the color of their jackets, and the way the Suburban looked under the lights. They took notes and had the security guard check the cameras, but all you could see on the video was the guys moving quick between the cars, their faces turned away. The police told me to wait inside while they walked out to look at my truck, shining their flashlights on the broken glass and slashed tires. I had to wait almost an hour for the tow truck, leaning against a shelf by the entrance, the groceries still scattered outside near the curb. The store manager came out and offered me a chair, but I couldn't sit down. My phone was blowing up with messages from my ex about picking up the kids the next day. I just told her the truck broke down, not mentioning the rest. The tow truck guy finally arrived, young, skinny, no jacket, just a hoodie, and he took one look at my truck and whistled. He swept up the glass, hooked up the chains, and loaded it onto the flatbed. He said he'd seen stuff like this before, mostly in the city, but not usually in this part of town. When everything was done, the cops took my statement again and told me to keep an eye out for the Suburban, but said without plate numbers or better footage, there wasn't much they could do. The next morning, I had to call in sick at work. My hands hurt from where I'd fallen and my knee was bruised. I spent the whole day dealing with insurance, getting a rental car, and trying to explain to the body shop what happened. When I finally picked up the kids from school, I could tell I looked rough. My son asked why I looked so tired and if I was mad about something. I just told him I hadn't slept well. That night, I watched from the window while they brushed their teeth, checking the street for any cars that didn't belong. I barely slept. About 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the kitchen eating cereal with the kids when I saw a news report about an attempted robbery at another supermarket, across town this time, late at night. The camera showed police cars with flashing lights in the background. The anchor said a retired Marine had fought back and managed to catch one of the attackers, holding him until police arrived. They found 2 more suspects nearby, including a guy in a dark jacket who had a record for assault. I recognized him from the blurry photo on the TV. Same blank stare, same heavy coat, even the same beanie pulled down low. The news said the guy they caught gave up his partners during questioning. The reporter didn't say much more, just that it was part of a string of late-night robberies targeting shoppers who came in alone. The police were warning everyone to be careful and not go out to the parking lot alone if you could help it. The story played for another minute, then cut back to the weather. I just sat there staring at the screen, not sure how to feel. My daughter asked if I was okay, and I told her I was just thinking about work. Later that week, the police called to follow up. They asked a few more questions and told me that the group had been hitting grocery stores around the city, always after 10, always looking for someone by themselves. They said I was lucky I ran when I did, that most people who tried to argue or fight back got hurt worse. I thanked them and hung up. My ex-wife called later that night, furious when she found out the truth from a mutual friend at the insurance place. She said I should have been more careful, that the kids needed me to be smart, not tough. I didn't argue. She was right. I still shop at that supermarket sometimes, mostly when I'm on day shifts and the kids are at school. I never go after 10 anymore, not even if I'm out of milk or bread. If I have to go late, I bring the kids with me, or I just wait until morning. I always look around the parking lot, checking for old cars sitting with their lights off, people hanging back in the aisles, anyone walking too slow. It's just a habit now. One of those things you pick up when you realize some people are just looking for someone vulnerable. A single parent working late, tired, trying to keep up. That's all it takes. I don't think I'll ever really let my guard down again. Not after seeing how easy it was for them to pick me out. I was driving east on I-40, somewhere between Winslow and Holbrook. It was about 4 in the morning, that stretch of highway where the road just goes dead straight, cornfields on both sides, the only light coming from my own headlights, and a couple of distant semis far ahead. My conference in Phoenix had run late, and instead of spending another night at some cheap hotel, I figured I'd tough it out, get a big coffee, and drive straight home. I had a radio station on, but there wasn't much coming through. Just static and the occasional faint oldies song. The world felt hollow, the kind of empty where you can hear your own breathing over the engine. My eyelids were getting heavy, and I was forcing myself to sit up straighter, rolling down the window for cold air, just anything to keep focused. I kept glancing at the digital clock on the dash and thinking, if I can make it past Holbrook before sunrise, I'll be good. About an hour outside the city, I saw hazard lights blinking up ahead, barely visible above the tall grass at the edge of the field. As I got closer, I realized it was a late model Ford pickup, blue or maybe black, nose down in the ditch about 20 feet off the road. The grass there was high and wet with dew, the kind that would soak your shoes just from stepping off the shoulder. I slowed as I passed, watching for any sign of someone standing near the truck, but there was no movement. The headlights were off, but the hazards were pulsing in the darkness, a soft red blinking like a warning. Something about the scene just felt wrong. The way the truck sat, like it had swerved or maybe been run off and then left there for hours. There was no fresh mud, but the angle looked too sharp to be accidental. No glass on the road, no debris, just the silent cab and the grass closing in around it. For a second, I thought about pulling over. I even hit my blinker and checked my mirrors, slowing down as I passed the spot. My gut was tight. The empty highway, the way the fields pressed up close, how you could see for miles in both directions and yet feel watched. I drove on, telling myself someone had already called for help. But the image of those blinking lights stuck in my rear view, getting smaller and smaller, until I rounded a slight bend and they were gone. I kept thinking, why didn't I stop? Was there someone out there? Maybe hiding? Maybe hurt? I pushed the feeling down and refocused on the drive, trying to shake it. The radio turned to fuzz. My hands were cold and my knuckles white on the wheel. Not another car in sight, just endless, flat, dark. I kept glancing at the clock and doing the math in my head. I figured I'd see more cars the closer I got to Albuquerque, but right then, it was like I was the only person left in the world. 10 minutes later, still thinking about that truck, I caught up to a set of taillights ahead. At first, I thought it might be another semi, but as I got closer, I saw it was a Toyota sedan, silver or white, driving much too slow, barely 35 in a 75. I came up behind it and kept my distance, waiting for a chance to pass. The car kept drifting close to the white line, then correcting. I thought, maybe it's someone old. Maybe they're just nervous. Or maybe they're having car trouble. I checked the gas, kept a steady speed, and watched for any sign that the driver was going to pull off. After a mile or so, the road straightened, and I signaled and pulled out to pass. As I came up alongside, I looked over. There was a man behind the wheel, maybe late 40s or 50s, scruffy beard, baseball cap pulled low. His hands were locked tight on the wheel, his face set straight ahead, eyes wide and unblinking. He didn't glance at me, didn't even seem to notice my car passing. The interior light from his dash lit his face in a weird, pale blue. I pressed down on the gas, just wanting to get past him and back into open space. Once I was a good distance ahead, I checked my mirror again, just out of habit. The Toyota had picked up speed. Fast. I watched the headlights shrink and then grow again in the rear view. Within a minute, he was right on my bumper, high beams cutting into the back of my car. I tapped my brakes once, but he didn't slow. Instead, he swerved suddenly to the left, coming up alongside me, matching my speed even as I accelerated. He kept staring forward, not at me, one hand coming off the wheel to make a tight, sharp gesture, pointing at the shoulder, telling me to pull over. His expression never changed, just that hard, blank stare, one finger jabbing at the empty road. I kept driving. He stayed next to me, perfectly matching every move. For a mile he did this, waving, pointing, then making a fist and pounding the air. My pulse was hammering in my ears. I focused on the road, checking for exits, for other cars, for any sign of light in the distance. The Toyota kept pace, the driver still gesturing, mouth working, maybe shouting something I couldn't hear through the glass. I tightened my grip on the wheel, jaw clenched, refusing to look over again. All I could do was keep going straight, holding speed, waiting for him to make his next move. He jerked his steering wheel and cut directly in front of me, almost clipping my bumper as he swerved and braked hard. The Toyota stopped dead, straddling both lanes at an angle, blocking me from going forward. My headlights splashed across the dust kicked up by his tires. I saw his door fly open, his silhouette jumping out with something metal in his hand. I had maybe half a second to choose. Either ram him, risk spinning out, or try to avoid the whole thing. I yanked the wheel hard to the right and caught the edge of the asphalt, bouncing straight onto a dirt farm road that cut off between the cornfields. The Outback slammed down hard on the uneven ground, but the tires caught and kept moving. He was shouting now, swinging a crowbar above his head, but the engine was so loud I couldn't make out a word. I floored it, the suspension rattling, dirt and rocks hammering the underside. The corn rose up on either side, closing in around me, but I kept glancing at the rear view. The guy was running after me, gaining at first, but he slipped and went down on one knee in the mud. I didn't slow down. I didn't care if I shredded a tire. The farm road twisted through the fields for maybe a mile before it hit a narrow county road, paved but rough. I turned left, heading toward what I guessed was the direction of town, still shaking and clutching the wheel so hard my hands were starting to ache. When I hit the first intersection with a street light, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I kept going until I saw the glow of a gas station up ahead, fluorescent lights reflecting off the pumps, and a single car idling by the door. I pulled in fast, locked my doors, and called 911 right from the parking lot. My voice was still shaking, but I tried to give as many details as I could. The color of the car, what the guy looked like, the direction I'd come from. The dispatcher asked if I was safe, then told me to stay put and that an officer would meet me there. A patrol car pulled in about 10 minutes later. The officer listened to my story, taking notes, nodding. He asked if I'd seen any other vehicles that looked out of place, and I told him about the Ford pickup in the ditch. That's when he told me they'd had several calls in the last month about similar incidents along that same stretch, abandoned cars, then someone trying to flag down drivers or force them off the road. He said, "We think they're using these vehicles as bait, hoping to catch someone alone. Best thing you did was not stop." Later that morning, they found the Toyota abandoned outside of town, hidden behind an old barn. It was stripped of plates, doors left open, no sign of the driver. The Ford pickup was gone too by then. Someone must have come back for it. Or maybe it had just been left as a decoy. The officer said both vehicles were reported stolen, part of a string of thefts going back months. There were tire tracks and footprints, but nothing that led anywhere specific. The police took my statement, told me to call if I remembered any other details. "If you'd stopped to help at the truck," the officer said, "you probably would have been walking right into it. This guy's targeting people late at night when nobody's around." The more the police looked, the more they realized this was organized. The same pattern kept popping up on the reports. One car used to block traffic, another to chase or trap anyone who didn't fall for the first trick. They said it was designed to make you feel isolated, then give you no way out except the one they wanted. All the attacks happened on empty roads, early morning, when everyone was tired or distracted. They warned me to avoid stopping for any vehicles at night, even if they looked like they needed help. "Just call us," the officer said. "Let us check it out." For weeks after, I kept checking my mirrors, even during the day, watching for anyone following too close. I started carrying a small flashlight and keeping my phone charger right by the gear shift. At first, I thought about taking a different route every time, but eventually I went back to I-40, telling myself to just stay alert. I still drove that same stretch for work, but I never stopped for anyone again, no matter what. Every time I saw a car in the ditch, I called it in from somewhere well lit, somewhere with people around. I didn't want to end up a headline or a warning on the news. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the local police. They'd caught the guy. He'd tried the same thing on an off-duty state trooper, picked the wrong car to chase. The trooper radioed for backup and boxed him in before he could get away. When they ran his prints, they found out he'd been working that section of highway for months, using a different stolen car each time, never staying long enough to get caught. The officer said he was connected to a string of robberies and at least one carjacking where things had ended a lot worse. He'd targeted people who looked tired, who looked like they were in a hurry, who might be just desperate enough to stop. Now, every time I drive past a broken-down vehicle or see hazard lights in the distance, I remember that night. I still feel guilty sometimes for not stopping, but I know better. Sometimes the right thing is to keep moving and call for help from a safe place. Whatever I did, it probably saved me. And maybe somebody else too. That truck in the ditch, with its hazard lights blinking in the darkness, probably saved more lives by looking suspicious than by actually needing help. Now, when I see someone stranded, I make the call, then keep going, eyes forward, hands steady on the wheel. When I was 17, my friend Ethan and I spent most weekends exploring abandoned places around Atlanta. We weren't really into anything crazy, just liked to see what was left behind in all these old spots. Old factories, closed schools, sometimes little shopping centers with everything ripped out. That Saturday, we had nothing else to do, and Ethan was set on checking out Fairy Tale Valley. It was this tiny theme park out near the edge of the city, with a castle gate and old rides shaped like animals. They'd gone bankrupt a few months before, and now they were starting to tear it all down. Some of our group had already gone earlier that day, but by the time we got there, it was just me and Ethan. He said we should take a look before everything was gone for good. We drove up as the sun was setting. The place wasn't huge, just big enough for a handful of little rides and snack stands. I remember the parking lot was cracked and covered in pine needles, but a few weeds still poked up through the concrete. The main entrance gate was chained up, so we parked down the street. Ethan climbed the fence first, pulling himself over, then waited for me on the other side. The metal rattled a bit when I landed. There were some houses not far away, but nobody seemed to notice us. Most of the rides had already been taken out, so the park was mostly empty concrete pads and old bolts sticking out of the ground. You could still see the outlines of where the carousel and Ferris wheel used to be, but the only thing left were rusty poles and broken fencing. Some pieces of playground equipment were piled up by the edge of the lot, all faded colors and plastic cracked from the sun. A couple of lights were on deeper inside, near where the snack bar used to be. The lights flickered like they were running on backup power or something. It didn't look like anybody was around, and there wasn't much left to steal. We wandered down the main path, gravel crunching under our feet. The painted animals on the old walls looked weird in the half-dark. There was a plastic swan with half its face scraped off, and a painted rabbit missing its ears. The air smelled stale, like wet dirt and whatever chemicals they used to clean the place. I tried to take a few pictures with my phone, but it was already getting dark, and most of them just looked blurry. Ethan walked ahead, stopping to poke through an old trash can filled with rotten paper cups and broken toys. Sometimes we'd find stuff like abandoned plushies, but tonight there wasn't much. It was quiet, not the usual quiet of an empty park, but a heavier kind. The place felt bigger now that it was empty, with the shapes of all the missing rides just sitting there like scars. Every step echoed a little too much. My backpack kept catching on stuff sticking out of the ground. We passed an old ticket booth with shattered glass on the ground, the inside already stripped out. I pointed my phone in to look around, but there was nothing but dead bugs and some wrappers. The only sound was our footsteps and the buzz from those security lights, kind of a low electric hum. After a while, we cut across where the log flume used to be, just a big rectangle of dried mud now. It looked like someone had driven through there with a truck recently. Ethan said something about the demo crew maybe working late, but I didn't see any tools or heavy equipment. We stuck to the old pathways, stepping around puddles where water had pooled in the cracks. I saw a pile of rusted metal shapes, probably parts of the old dragon ride, stacked up like garbage. Ethan kept stopping to take pictures. He was into this kind of stuff, always posting to some urban explorer group. I mostly just followed along. We came around a curve in the path, near what used to be the popcorn stand. There was this weird shadow near the old counter. I didn't pay attention at first, thought it was just part of the building where a sign used to hang. But as we got closer, I saw a shape. Someone standing there. It wasn't a kid or some other explorer. The person was older, maybe late 30s or 40s. He was wearing a jacket, kind of dirty, with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He just stood there, looking straight at us. My first thought was security, maybe a worker keeping an eye out for scrappers or vandals. I nudged Ethan, but he was already staring. The man didn't say anything for a few seconds. He had his hands in his pockets, not moving, like he'd been waiting for us. The security light above the stand flickered, making his face hard to see. My stomach kind of tightened, and I just stood still. Ethan shifted his weight, his sneakers crunching on the gravel. The guy finally spoke, loud enough to carry over the whole empty lot. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His voice wasn't angry, more tired and rough. Ethan started to explain, something about just taking pictures, but the man cut him off. "You're not supposed to be in here. Park's closed." I said sorry, told him we'd leave. The man started walking toward us, slow and steady. His boots scraped on the path. I could hear the jangle of keys or maybe something metal in his pocket. Ethan looked at me, waiting to see if we should try to run, but it didn't feel like that kind of situation. The guy didn't have any kind of uniform, no badge, no flashlight, not even a radio. He didn't even look like he worked there. His jeans were stained at the knees, and his jacket was ripped along one sleeve. He didn't have the body language of a cop or real security. He just kept coming closer. We backed away a few steps, but didn't bolt. The man moved under the security light and finally stopped just a few feet in front of us. I could see his face now. He had a patchy beard, dark bags under his eyes, and a fresh scrape down the side of his jaw. His eyes darted from me to Ethan, then back again. He didn't look official at all. That was the moment I realized we might have walked into something we didn't want to be a part of. He was wearing dirty work clothes and had this weird, intense look in his eyes, like he hadn't slept in days. His cheeks were hollow. His skin looked pale even under the yellow light. I noticed his hands were rough and stained, like someone who worked outside or did a lot of manual labor. In his right hand, he was carrying a big wrench, the kind you use on pipes. He didn't hold it like a tool. He held it low by his side, gripping it tight, ready to swing. He stepped toward us, his boots making a heavy scraping sound. He said, "You two, come with me. I'll show you out." His voice was too harsh for the words to sound helpful. He glanced over his shoulder once like he was checking for someone else. He didn't blink much, just kept staring at us. Ethan reached back, caught my wrist, and whispered, "Let's just go." I nodded. We both backed up, slow, trying not to show how freaked out we were. The man scowled and raised the wrench a little higher. I said, "Come on." His voice was getting louder, rougher. The way he looked at us, it felt like if we turned our backs, he'd be right there. He started walking quicker, closing the space between us, his shoulders tensed. I could hear the metal clink against his leg with every step. I didn't wait any longer. I turned and ran, pulling Ethan with me. Behind us, the man yelled, "You're not supposed to leave! You've seen too much!" His voice echoed across the empty park. We sprinted past broken benches and around piles of junk, the ground uneven under our feet. I could hear him coming after us, his boots pounding the path, the wrench clanging every time he hit something metal. My breath felt sharp in my chest, and I could barely see where I was going. We didn't stop to look back. The pathways twisted between empty concrete pads and old signs pointing nowhere. I tripped over a pipe, stumbled, but Ethan caught me and kept me moving. Lights flickered as we passed, throwing our shadows all over the cracked pavement. We cut across a patch of weeds and ended up by the edge of the fence. I could still hear the man behind us, shouting things I couldn't understand now. I grabbed the chain link, shoved my foot in a hole, and started climbing. Ethan was already halfway up, scrambling so fast the fence rattled. I could hear the man's steps getting closer, and then I felt the whole fence shake as he grabbed it below me. My hands slipped on the rough wire, tearing the skin on my fingers. I swung one leg over, almost lost my balance, but dropped hard onto the other side. Ethan was waiting for me, breathing heavy, his face white and scared. We ran to the car. I fumbled with the keys, dropped them once, finally got the door open. As soon as I started the engine, the headlights caught a shape at the fence, just the man's outline, staring out at us from the other side, the wrench glinting in his fist. We didn't talk until we were far down the road, the windows rolled up, the city lights coming back into view. My hands were still shaking. Ethan stared out the window, jaw clenched, and finally said, "I thought he was going to kill us." We didn't go home right away. We drove in circles for a while, making sure nobody followed. When we got back to Ethan's place, we locked every door and just sat in the living room, not saying much. The next morning, Ethan told his older brother about what happened. He listened, didn't say anything for a minute, then said, "There's been stories like that. Homeless guys living out there, stripping copper, breaking into the sheds. He said the cops were always chasing people away, but there were too many places to hide, and the park was easy to get into at night." I told him about the wrench, the way the guy looked at us, and his brother just nodded like he'd heard it all before. If you called the cops, maybe they'd check it out. Or maybe not. They probably don't want to deal with it. For the next few days, I checked the news and social media, half expecting to see something about Fairy Tale Valley. Instead, there were only little updates, posts about new construction fences going up, reports of people sneaking in. Then someone shared a story about the police putting up more patrols. They said they were getting calls about squatters living in the buildings, even stories about people stealing tools and breaking windows. A couple of kids got caught trying to climb in and got charged for trespassing. A week later, we drove by the place during the day. The fence was taller now, with barbed wire wrapped along the top. There were new no trespassing signs every 10 feet, and the entrance gate was welded shut. I could see fresh tracks in the dirt where someone had dragged pallets or metal out. The old buildings were still there, but most of the windows were boarded up now. The playground animals were gone, probably tossed in a dumpster. It didn't look like a place where anyone could live anymore, but I knew people would try. Later, I heard the police had found sleeping bags, empty cans, and piles of copper wire hidden inside the old funhouse. They said there was evidence that at least 3 people had been using the buildings at night, stripping metal from anything left behind. Nobody said if they found the guy with the wrench. Maybe he moved on. Maybe he got arrested. Nobody ever came asking questions. Ethan and I stopped exploring abandoned places after that. Sometimes I think about that night, the way the man looked at us, how desperate he seemed. We probably scared him as much as he scared us. But he was right. We'd seen too much. We saw how people hang on in places everyone else has forgotten, and how fast things can turn bad when you don't know what you're walking into. I don't go looking for that kind of trouble anymore. Some places are abandoned for a reason, and some people do whatever it takes to keep it that way. So last year I was running a small advertising agency and had to travel for client meetings pretty regularly. My schedule was usually tight, but I made it work since most of my clients were local, just a few meetings downtown or at restaurants in the evening. I have a 5-year-old son, Liam. He's a pretty easy kid, listens well, not a lot of drama, but still too young to leave on his own, obviously. My usual babysitter was a college student named Jessie. She lived in the next building over, really reliable, never late. That Thursday, she texted me in the morning to say she was running a fever and felt awful, so she couldn't make it. I tried calling a few neighbors, but nobody was around, and by lunch I was running out of options. I had an important dinner meeting scheduled that night, one of those, if I miss it, I lose the client type of things. My agency was still small, so missing out on this kind of work wasn't an option. I downloaded an app called Babysit24 that my friend recommended. It worked like a rideshare, but for sitters. You could see profiles, reviews, and their background checks. I posted the job around 11 a.m., wrote out the basics, just dinner and bedtime for a 5-year-old, no allergies, no pets. I got a few replies, but everyone was booked except for one guy named Ryan, a 19-year-old college student. His reviews were okay. A few parents said he was responsible. I didn't love that he was my only option, but I needed to get to this meeting. I booked him for 5 p.m. He messaged back right away, said he'd be on time, asked if Liam needed any special meals, and that was it. I told him to just give Liam the mac and cheese in the fridge and be firm about bedtime at 8. He responded, "Got it. See you at 5. The app had a feature that pinged me when the sitter got close to my address, and at 5:15 I got a notification that said, "Ryan has arrived at your location." But nobody rang the bell. At first, I thought maybe he was just slow getting out of the car. My building isn't hard to find, third door from the corner. There's a big silver mailbox out front, so nobody really misses it. 5 more minutes went by. I checked through the peephole just in case he was standing there, but the porch was empty. I texted him in the app, "Hey, are you here?" and waited. Nothing. I opened the front door and looked up and down the block. There was no one around except the neighbor's dog barking behind the fence and an Amazon van at the other end of the street. I went back inside and tried to just be patient. 10 minutes later, still nothing. I tried calling the number listed in the app profile, but it went straight to voicemail, just a generic greeting, no mention of his name. I waited another 15 minutes, refreshing the app, checking the front steps. My son kept asking when his babysitter was coming. I tried to act like nothing was wrong, just told him Ryan was stuck in traffic. By 5:45, I was pacing around, getting anxious. I even checked the app to make sure I hadn't made a mistake about the time or the address. It all matched up. At 6 p.m., I had to make a decision. I tried calling the number again and texting through the app, but everything still went straight to voicemail. There were no other sitters available that night, and I couldn't bring Liam with me to a steakhouse and expect him to sit quietly for 2 hours while I tried to impress a client. I ended up messaging the client, apologizing and canceling the dinner. I hated doing it. I was annoyed, mostly at myself for trusting some random app with such short notice, but I didn't see another way. I tried to let it go. I put my phone down, told Liam we'd have a special night instead. He was happy enough, so we ordered pizza from the place down the street. He picked a movie to watch, something with talking animals. Nothing I would have picked myself, but at least it kept him entertained. By the time the food arrived, it was close to 7. We settled in on the couch. I checked my phone a couple of times, but there were no new messages from Ryan, nothing in the app, no missed calls. We ate, and I tried to forget about the lost client and just enjoy the evening with Liam. He asked about the babysitter a couple of times. I just shrugged it off and told him we'd get Jesse again next time. After dinner, he wanted ice cream, so I let him have a small bowl. We watched most of the movie, and I was just starting to think about getting him ready for bed when the doorbell rang. It was about 7:30. I figured maybe the pizza place had come back by mistake, or maybe it was a neighbor. I picked up my phone and checked the app, but there were still no new messages from Ryan. I looked out through the peephole, and there was a young guy on the porch. He was tall, maybe a little awkward, with a backpack over one shoulder and a Babysit 24 lanyard around his neck. He rang the bell again and waved at the door. I opened it a crack, and he smiled. "Hi, I'm Ryan, from the babysitting app," he said. He acted like nothing was wrong, like showing up 2 hours late was no big deal. He glanced past me into the hallway, then looked back at me, still smiling. "Sorry I'm late. Got a little lost on the way over. Is it still okay for me to come in and watch Liam?" He was already shifting his weight like he expected to just walk in and start work, as if I was the one who needed to explain myself. I told him the job was canceled because he was over 2 hours late, and before he could say anything else, I closed the door. I heard him let out a little frustrated sigh through the door, but he didn't knock again or try to argue. I figured he would just leave. I checked through the side window and saw his car was still parked in front of my house, lights off, engine running. He looked like he was messing with his phone, probably calling the app or checking directions, but I couldn't be sure. I tried to get back to Liam, who was still sitting in the living room, half watching the end of the movie and asking if we could have dessert. I tried to act normal, just in case Ryan was still nearby and looking in through the windows. 10 minutes went by. I glanced through the peephole again and saw that Ryan was still there, only now he was standing right up against the door. Not ringing, not knocking, just standing there, almost pressed against the wood, like he was listening. I couldn't hear anything from my side, but I saw the shadow of his shoes under the door and the edge of his backpack. I watched him for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a minute or two. He didn't move, didn't shift or pace, just stayed right up close, breathing quietly, eyes fixed on the doorframe. Eventually I walked away, trying not to let him see me moving through the hallway. When I checked again later, maybe 5 minutes after that, he was gone from the door, but I caught sight of him in the side yard, walking slowly along the side of my house. My hands started shaking a little. I told Liam to go upstairs and get ready for bed, but to stay in my room. I didn't want to leave him alone even for a second. I locked the front door, then moved through the downstairs quietly, shutting and locking every window I could reach. When I got to the back door, I pulled aside the curtain just a crack. There was Ryan, moving from window to window along the back wall, trying each one with a slow, deliberate push, almost careful not to make noise. He would check the frame, look over his shoulder, then try the next one. He wasn't in a hurry. It looked like he was searching for something specific, not just seeing if he could get inside. That's when it hit me that this had nothing to do with the babysitting job anymore. He wasn't lost or just upset about being turned away. He was looking for a way in. I grabbed my phone and hurried up the stairs to my bedroom, where Liam was already sitting on the bed hugging his pillow. I closed and locked my bedroom door, then pushed a dresser in front of it just in case. I dialed 911. The operator answered quickly, asked for my address and told me to stay calm. I explained there was a man outside my house trying to get in, that he was supposed to be a babysitter, but had shown up hours late and wouldn't leave. The operator told me to stay where I was and keep the line open. I could hear footsteps moving around the back of the house, the quiet sound of window screens shifting, a dull thump as he tried the sliding door. I stayed on the line, whispering back to the operator when she asked questions. Liam sat next to me, wide-eyed but silent, clutching my arm. We waited in the dark, listening for the sirens. I could hear Ryan on the porch, then moving around to the garage. He tried the side door, jiggled the handle, then walked back to the front. Suddenly there was pounding on the front door, loud enough to make Liam jump. I heard voices, shouting, then the clear sound of a police radio. I peeked out the window and saw 2 officers with flashlights moving toward the porch. Ryan was standing in the middle of the walkway, arms crossed, talking quickly and waving his phone. The police talked to him for a few minutes. I could see Ryan pointing at my house, then at his phone, then back to the officers. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but he looked agitated, pacing back and forth, pulling up something on his phone to show the officers. They motioned for him to calm down, kept him at a distance while one of them came to the door. I opened it just a crack and handed the officer my phone with the call still going. The officer listened, then checked my ID and asked me a few questions about the situation, about Ryan, about the app, and whether I had actually hired him. The officers walked back to Ryan. He was now saying that I owed him money for the babysitting job, that I'd hired him and was refusing to pay. He kept insisting he was just here to work, that I was scamming him, but his story fell apart pretty fast. The officers looked over the app record, saw he'd been marked as a no-show, and told him he needed to leave. He argued, but finally got back in his car and drove away, tires squealing as he left the curb. The police stayed for a bit, took a report, and told me to call again if he came back. They also called the app company right there in my living room, giving them the details. The company shut down Ryan's account immediately, apologized, and said he'd violated their safety rules. There was nothing they could do legally since he hadn't actually broken in, and the police said the same. It was up to me to press charges if I wanted to, but there wasn't much to go on except trespassing, and even that was a stretch. After that, I didn't hear from Ryan again. The app company sent me a credit for a free booking, said they would review safety procedures, but I didn't care. I went back to using my regular sitter only, and if Jesse wasn't available, I just canceled my plans. I never found out what Ryan really wanted or why he was so determined to get inside. Maybe he was just desperate for the job, or maybe he'd seen something that made him think my house was an easy target. I still wonder if he'd been watching the house, waiting for a night when it was just me and Liam. There was nothing special about us, just another family in a quiet neighborhood, but sometimes that's all it takes. I kept the doors locked every night after that, checked the windows twice before bed. I never saw Ryan again, but sometimes I thought I saw his car parked a few blocks away, or maybe just another car that looked the same. I told myself it was just my nerves. Liam didn't ask about the babysitter anymore. I told him we'd just stick with Jesse from now on. No more strangers, no more apps. The convenience of technology wasn't worth the risk. I learned that some shortcuts just aren't worth taking, not when you have someone else to protect. So when I was 30 and working as a nurse, I decided to try Bumble again after being single for months. I wasn't expecting anything exciting, honestly. I was working a lot of night shifts, mostly keeping my head down, just trying to get through each week. I remember sitting in the break room at the hospital, eating leftover pasta from a plastic container, and swiping out of boredom more than anything else. Brad was one of the first matches I got that week. He looked pretty regular in his photos, just some shots with friends at bars, a couple hiking pictures, nothing that set off alarms. I wasn't really expecting much, just something to distract me from the never-ending beeping of IV pumps. We started messaging that morning. He asked basic questions, where I worked, if I was from the city, what I did in my free time. The conversation was pretty bland, but I didn't mind. I wasn't looking for deep connections or anything, just someone to talk to. He told me he worked in IT, said he liked dogs and running. He used a lot of smiley faces, which felt kind of forced, but I didn't think much about it. We talked about favorite foods, TV shows, and for a second it felt sort of normal, like something people might actually do when they're bored and looking for a date. After 2 days, he asked if we could move the conversation to text. He said he didn't really like the app notifications. That sounded fine, so I gave him my number. The switch was immediate. Literally, the first thing he did was send me 2 explicit photos. No warning, nothing. I stared at my phone in disbelief, my sandwich still in my hand. For a second, I thought he must have sent them by mistake, or maybe it was a joke. But then he followed up right away with a long message telling me all the things he wanted to do to me, demanding that we meet up that same night. He said he wanted to come over after my shift, that he was in the mood for adult activities. The change in tone was so sudden, I just froze there, reading his words over and over. I put my phone away and went back to work. I had 6 patients on the floor, and no time to deal with any of this. After a couple hours, I replied just to set some boundaries. I told him I was working and that I couldn't respond to those kinds of messages at work. I said it was inappropriate and that I didn't appreciate being sent those photos. I tried to keep it polite, not wanting to escalate things or cause drama. But the response was instant and aggressive. Brad immediately lost it. His next message was almost a full paragraph accusing me of playing games. He said I was being cold, that I had led him on by matching and then not agreeing to meet him right away. He told me he didn't like people wasting his time. Then, within minutes, he started spamming me with texts. They came one after another, sometimes 2 or 3 in the same minute. At first, it was questions. Why wasn't I responding? What was I doing? Why couldn't I take 5 minutes to talk to him? Then the tone started getting angrier. He called me selfish, said nurses were supposed to be caring, and that I was just another fake person from the app. I had alarms going off, a patient calling for pain meds, and my charge nurse asking for updates, all while my phone kept buzzing. I put it on silent and stuffed it in my locker, not wanting to see any more. When I checked again a couple hours later, there were 32 new messages from him. Some were just, or single-word replies like, "Hello," or "Are you serious?" But some were full-on rants about how women on dating apps waste men's time and pretend to be interested just for attention. I ignored all of it, hoping he'd get bored and leave me alone. But he didn't stop. The messages kept coming, more than 50 by the end of my shift. When I was finally able to leave, I was so tired I could barely think straight. I walked out to my car in the dark hospital parking lot, my phone buzzing again in my pocket. When I unlocked it, I saw that Brad had called me 17 times in a row. Each time, he left a voicemail. I didn't listen to any of them, but I could see the little audio files stacking up in my missed calls log. The preview on the last one just said, "If you don't call me back right now, I'm blocking you forever." As if that was some kind of threat that would bother me. I sat in my car, just staring at the steering wheel for a minute. My hands were shaking a little, not from fear exactly, but from being so on edge. I was exhausted from 12 hours on my feet, my legs aching, my head pounding. I didn't want to deal with this guy, or with anyone, honestly. I just wanted to go home and sleep. I scrolled through the messages one more time, just to be sure I wasn't overreacting. But they were all there. Over 50 texts, most of them angry, demanding, or weirdly pleading. He alternated between saying I was heartless and accusing me of being a tease, and then apologizing, and then ramping up the threats again. It was a cycle, on repeat. I blocked his number right there in the parking lot. I didn't respond, didn't say anything. I just hit block contact and threw my phone on the passenger seat, hoping that would finally be the end of it. Within an hour of blocking him, I got more texts, this time from a number I didn't recognize. At first, I thought it might be a wrong number, or maybe someone from work, but the messages made it obvious right away that it was Brad. He used the same phrases and referenced stuff we talked about before. The first text just said, "Not so easy to get rid of me," and then another, "You owe me an explanation. I deserve at least that." I didn't reply. I just blocked that number too. Not even 5 minutes later, a new one popped up. It was almost identical. He was angry, then apologetic, then angry again. He called me childish, immature, said I was just like all the fake women online, then sent a few more texts calling me names I'd rather not repeat. By then, it was after midnight. I tried to ignore my phone and just watch something on TV, but every few minutes it would buzz again. Each new number, each new message, I just blocked as soon as I recognized the pattern. At 2 a.m., another number called, and I let it ring, but it called again immediately. Something in me just snapped, and I picked up the phone, not even thinking. The voice on the other end was calm, but there was something really off about it. He didn't even say hello. He just said, "Why are you ignoring me? I'm outside your house. I see your lights are on in your living room." My blood went cold. I never told him where I lived, not even the neighborhood. He described the curtains I had, the color of the lamp that was on by the window. I dropped to the floor and crawled out of sight. I barely whispered, "How do you know where I live?" There was a long pause. He kind of chuckled and said, "You posted a picture on Instagram, remember? Months ago, standing by your mailbox. You can see your house number clear as day. Not hard to figure out the street after that. You shouldn't be so careless online. I honestly had no memory of the photo, but when he said that, I pulled up my Instagram and scrolled back. Sure enough, there it was, a picture I'd posted last fall. I wasn't thinking about the background at all. You could see the numbers on the side of the mailbox right next to my leg. I felt sick. I hung up without another word and called 911, my hands shaking. I kept the lights off and peeked through the curtain, trying to see the street without being seen. There was a black car parked directly across from my house. The dispatcher kept me on the line, telling me to stay inside and stay away from the windows. She asked if I recognized the car or the person inside. I said no, I couldn't see the face, just that someone was sitting there with the engine running. She told me officers were on the way and to keep the doors locked. I didn't feel safe staying there, so I grabbed my bag and my keys and crept out the back door, slipping quietly to my car parked behind the house. I drove straight to my friend Sarah's apartment on the other side of town. She was awake and let me in right away, no questions asked. The next morning, the police called me at Sarah's. The officer said they'd found a man in a black sedan outside my house around 3 a.m. He drove off when they pulled up, but they managed to get his license plate. They ran it and confirmed it belonged to Brad. I went to the police station that morning, filed a harassment report, and told them everything that had happened since I'd matched with him on Bumble. The officer recommended I petition for a restraining order as soon as possible. I went to the courthouse and waited my turn, barely able to sit still. The judge didn't hesitate. After seeing the texts, call logs, and hearing the police report, he signed a temporary restraining order right then and there. I stayed with Sarah for a few more nights and spent every spare minute going through all my social media. I deleted anything that showed my house, my street, even places I went regularly. I changed all my privacy settings to the strictest options, took down every tagged post, and messaged my friends asking them not to post anything about me or tag my location. The experience shook me, more than anything that's ever happened before. I never thought twice about what I shared online. But now, I never post anything that could identify where I live or where I am at that exact moment. I don't use dating apps anymore, not after what happened with Brad. It's just not worth the risk. You really never know who's watching or what they'll do with the smallest detail you let slip. When I was 18, I decided to take a summer psychology course at the local community college. I figured it would look good on my applications, and honestly, I just wanted something to do for a few months. The college was only a 15-minute drive from home, so I'd get up in the morning, eat something quick, and get there before the parking lot filled up. The class was small, maybe 20 people, and the building was always freezing cold. That smell of old air conditioner and marker ink just hanging there. Most students kept to themselves, everyone tired and on their phones, barely talking between lectures. There was this guy in class, Kyle, who stood out from the very first day. He always came in late, sometimes blasting music from his phone with no headphones, and he'd just slide into a seat with this look like he didn't care what anyone thought. He skipped half the lectures, didn't even bother to bring a notebook, and he'd argue with the professor over things that didn't even matter. I remember him getting into it with Mrs. Anderson about something from the syllabus. Most students just ignored him. After the second week, I noticed that Kyle started watching me, not just in class, but in the hallway. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. Maybe he just looked in my direction because there was nothing else to see. But every time class ended, I'd gather my stuff and try to leave quick, and Kyle would already be out of his chair, standing by the door or leaning against the wall outside. It wasn't just once or twice. I started to realize he was always somewhere nearby as I left. He'd lean on the water fountain or mess with his phone, but as soon as I walked out, he'd fall in step behind me. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. Maybe he parked in the same lot. So, I started changing up how I left. Some days I'd take the side stairs instead of the main entrance, or I'd hang back and wait until the hallway was clear before leaving. But no matter what I did, when I got to the exit, there he was, either ahead of me or coming up from behind. Sometimes he'd be waiting just outside, leaning on the concrete pillar, eyes on the sky like he was bored. I'd keep walking, pretending to look at my phone, but I could feel him falling in step. He never spoke at first, just walked at the same pace as me, a few feet behind. A month before things got really weird, there was this incident in the hallway where Kyle started screaming at the dean about something. I still don't even know what set him off. The whole building got quiet, everyone looking, and security showed up, but nothing happened beyond a warning. The next class, Mrs. Anderson kept giving him these wary glances, and a couple of students switched seats to get farther away. After that, most people avoided him. He didn't seem to care, but for some reason, he focused even more on me. Sometimes, when I left, he'd actually speed up to catch up. Once, he was waiting by the vending machines as I came down the stairs. I kept my eyes down, walked straight to the exit, but he just started walking next to me like we were friends. It was subtle at first, just that weird feeling of being watched, but I started noticing little things that made my skin prickle. My name written on the corner of his desk in block letters, even though I never spoke to him. His car, an old white sedan with mismatched hubcaps, was always parked 2 rows over from mine, even on days when the lot was almost empty. It felt like he was tracking where I went. Some days, he'd wait at the main doors, arms crossed, and nod at me as I passed. Other times, I'd see him in the cafeteria, sitting alone but facing my direction, just staring blankly. The only time I heard his voice was during class when he'd mutter answers or laugh at something on his phone. I tried to avoid any contact, left quickly after class, changed up my route, but nothing worked. He always found me. If I took the long way around the science building, he'd still show up behind me. Even if I left 5 minutes late, he'd be waiting outside, pretending to text. Once I ducked into the library and waited for almost half an hour. When I came out, he was right there on the bench, scrolling on his phone, but his eyes flicked up as soon as I pushed the door open. That was the first time I felt real dread, like I couldn't shake him off, no matter what I tried. It got worse. Kyle started following me all the way to the parking lot after every class. It wasn't just walking the same way. He'd walk beside me, matching my steps, asking these weird questions that made me uncomfortable. He wanted to know about my car. "You drive the red Civic, right?" he asked once, staring at my keys. "Do you always park in the same spot?" Another day, "Is that your only car? Sometimes I see a blue one." He asked if I ever drove at night or early in the morning, what time I usually left campus, stuff that sounded normal at first, but kept getting more specific. I started wearing headphones so I wouldn't have to hear him, kept my phone out and pretended to be on a call. But he'd still talk. He never touched me, but he always walked just a little too close. Sometimes, when I glanced over, he was just staring straight at me, not blinking. His eyes were always flat, like he was waiting for something. The lot was big and always half empty by the time we left, so it was just me, him, and rows of cars. One time, I switched up which spot I parked in, hoping he wouldn't find me. But as I got close, I saw him already standing by my car, leaning against the hood. That's when I decided I had to say something. After one especially bad day, I went straight to Mrs. Anderson's office after class. I told her everything. How he waited for me, the questions about my car, the following me all the way to the lot. She didn't brush me off. She closed her laptop, asked for details, and promised she'd do something. The next class, she met me outside the lecture hall, kept her bag on her shoulder, and told me she'd walk with me to the car. Kyle was there, as usual, at the end of the hallway. When he saw Mrs. Anderson beside me, he didn't say anything, just stood by the door and watched as we walked out. The first few days Mrs. Anderson walked me to my car. It seemed to work. Kyle would hang back, just watching from a distance. I'd get in, lock the doors, and drive off while she waited to make sure I was gone. For the first time all summer, I almost felt safe. But even with her beside me, I could feel his eyes following us all the way across the lot. Kyle stopped coming to class for about 2 weeks after Mrs. Anderson started walking me to my car. At first, I kept expecting him to show up somewhere on campus, maybe lurking in the halls or waiting by the parking lot, but he was just gone. The first day he was missing, people actually whispered about it. A few students noticed he wasn't there and someone said maybe he finally got kicked out. I tried to focus on class and keep my head down, but every time I crossed the parking lot, I looked over my shoulder just in case. The first week went by, then another, and nothing happened. I started thinking maybe it was over, maybe he found someone else to bother, or maybe he just gave up. Then one morning, about halfway through class, I looked up and saw him sitting in the back row again. He looked worse than ever, hair greasy and sticking up in the back, clothes wrinkled like he'd slept in them. His eyes were sunken, and he just stared straight ahead the entire lecture, not even pretending to pay attention. The room got tense as soon as he walked in. Even Mrs. Anderson seemed more alert, glancing over at him a few times while she wrote on the whiteboard. When class ended, everyone packed up fast. I tried to slip out with the crowd, but as I reached down to grab my backpack, I saw Kyle standing right beside my desk. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me with this fixed look. After a few seconds, he leaned in closer, his voice low but clear. "I'll be waiting for you." Then he turned and walked out before I could react. The classroom went dead silent for a second. Mrs. Anderson, who'd seen and heard the whole thing, immediately stood up, told everyone to stay seated, and pulled out her phone. She called campus security right then and there, giving my name, Kyle's name, and telling them exactly what he'd said. She didn't let me leave alone. She waited until the building's security guard came, and then she and the guard walked me out to my car. Kyle wasn't in sight, but I could feel my heart pounding all the way across the lot. Mrs. Anderson told me not to drive straight home, just in case, and the guard wrote down my plate and gave me a number to call if anything happened. That night, I hardly slept at all. The next day, I got an email from the school's security office asking me to come in for a meeting. When I went to the security office, the chief was waiting with a folder full of papers and a laptop open to the campus camera feeds. He told me they'd been reviewing footage from the last month. What they found was more disturbing than anything I expected. Even on days when Kyle didn't come to class, his car showed up on the security tapes. He'd park in different parts of the lot, always just a few spaces away from mine, sometimes getting out to look in my windows. They had video of him leaning close to the glass, cupping his hands around his face to see inside, then pulling out a small notebook and writing things down. They also noticed that Kyle had figured out my schedule for my other courses. There was footage of him hanging around the doors to my English class on Tuesdays, and by the science building on Thursdays, just standing off to the side or sitting on a bench pretending to read. Sometimes he'd leave for an hour and then come back, always checking his phone, watching the doors, never talking to anyone. When security checked with other students, they found out Kyle had been asking questions about me. What kind of car I drove, if I lived nearby, if I ever went to the campus gym, even what my parents did for work. No one had thought much of it until now. The administration decided he'd violated multiple parts of the Student Conduct Code, especially the ones about harassment and stalking. They called him in that afternoon and expelled him on the spot. The next day, Security told me Kyle was being interviewed in the dean's office as part of the expulsion process. I didn't have to be there, but they let me know what was said. Kyle claimed he was just trying to be friendly, that he thought I was flirting with him by looking at him in class, or being nice, when I answered questions out loud. He told the security chief that he didn't understand why I was avoiding him, if I liked him so much. The chief explained to me later that this kind of delusion wasn't uncommon. People like Kyle often misinterpret totally normal behavior as some kind of signal or invitation, even when you do everything you can to avoid them. Kyle was banned from campus property permanently. He was told any further contact, texting, following, even just showing up, would mean the police would get involved. Security sent me a letter outlining the restraining order and gave me a direct phone number for emergencies. After that, the rest of the summer session passed quietly. I still looked over my shoulder in the parking lot every day, sometimes taking the long way around or parking in different places just in case. For weeks after, I kept expecting him to show up somewhere, but he never did. Finishing that course, I started to realize how easy it is to miss the early signs when someone's behavior crosses a line. Kyle never broke into my car, never physically threatened me, never touched me. But the way he watched, followed, and tracked my routine made me feel like I was being hunted. People always say to trust your instincts, and now I know why. Even if someone hasn't technically broken the law yet, persistent, unwanted attention is its own kind of danger. I learned to take it seriously, to speak up, and not wait for things to get worse. The next fall, I switched campuses and never saw Kyle again. But I still check the mirrors before I get out of my car, and I never ignore that feeling when something just isn't right. I was living in Chicago working as a graphic designer for a mid-sized company downtown. I'm blind, so I always had Rex, my German Shepherd guide dog, with me on my commute. Most days, things were pretty routine. I'd leave the office around 6:15, grab a coffee at the same shop on Adams, and catch the Green Line southbound. After so many rides, I knew the sequence of sounds the train made, the weight of the crowd, the way people shuffled around Rex or, sometimes, just ignored us completely. But that Thursday night was different. The weather was getting colder, I remember that, and my fingers were a bit stiff as I pressed the button on my phone to check the time. 6:29. The platform was busy, the usual after-work murmur and shuffling, and I could smell someone's fast food bag from a few seats down. I found an empty seat, guided by Rex's nose, and gave him the quiet command to tuck under the bench. I adjusted my coat and pulled my bag closer, just waiting out the ride. After a couple of stops, I started to get that prickly feeling that someone was watching me. I know most people glance at Rex, especially kids or tourists, but this wasn't the same. I could feel the eyes on me, heavier, like the stare was sticking to my skin. There was the sound of a briefcase snapping shut, a shuffling of stiff fabric, probably a suit. I tried to ignore it at first. Sometimes people are just curious or want to ask questions about service dogs. But as the train rocked through the next few stops, the feeling only got stronger. The man didn't shift his attention. I listened, keeping my head down, tracking his movements by the slight squeak of polished shoes when the train swayed, the brush of a wool coat. He wasn't reading a paper, wasn't typing on a phone, just sitting very still, too close and too focused. Every time the train braked or the announcements came over the speaker, I heard him exhale, steady, never anxious, always watching. It started to make my neck itch. The other commuters were wrapped up in their own worlds, scrolling or dozing or chattering in low voices, but I could tell this man wasn't distracted for a second. I shifted in my seat and put my hand on Rex's head. That usually makes people back off, or at least gives me a chance to check if they're going to start a conversation. But the man didn't say anything. I heard his shoes scrape the floor like he'd leaned forward a little, then settle again. Rex was tense. His ears kept flicking back toward the man. Sometimes Rex gets like that with people who make sudden movements or who are clearly intoxicated. But this was something else. It wasn't that the guy was loud or acting out, just deliberate. I focused on my own breathing and tried to look as calm as possible. I listened for clues, paper rustling, the clink of keys, someone coughing. But the man was nearly silent, except for the breathing. After a few more stops, the train started to empty. The usual Thursday night crowd was thinning out, but the man stayed. I could feel it. When the conductor called my stop on the south side, I stood up and gave Rex the command to lead. The train jerked as it came to a stop and the doors hissed open. I moved down the aisle with Rex guiding me, trying to listen to who else was leaving. The man in the suit rose too, his footsteps echoing right behind me, not in a hurry but close. I could smell his aftershave as we stepped onto the platform. The scent was sharp, clinical, something I usually only noticed in offices or bank lobbies. I waited at the top of the stairs for a second to adjust my bag and listen to the footsteps around me. The train rumbled off behind us. I could hear the man's shoes tapping the concrete, slower now. It was late enough that there weren't many people getting off at my stop. Usually, by this time, I recognized at least a few of the other commuters. But that night, I didn't hear any familiar voices. Just the sound of Rex's tags jingling, the man's shoes, and one other distant conversation. I didn't have to turn around to know he was following me off the train. He'd made it obvious enough on the ride, and now it seemed too perfect that he'd get off at my stop too, when I'd felt his eyes on me the whole time. It was dark outside, the kind of city darkness where the streetlights only light up little circles on the sidewalk. Rex waited for my command. I kept my pace steady, not hurrying, not slowing down. I didn't want to look like I was nervous, but I was thinking about every move, every street crossing. My apartment was only a couple blocks away. Normally I would have walked straight home, let Rex lead us down our usual route, cut through the quieter side street. But I could hear the man's steps behind me, a precise rhythm. He kept exactly 15 meters back, close enough to be deliberate, far enough that nobody passing would call it out as weird. I could almost picture him, neat gray suit, dark coat, maybe a briefcase. The steps never faltered, not even when I slowed for a red light at the intersection. Rex was acting different too. He kept glancing back, breaking his training just enough that I could tell he was picking up on my tension. I gripped the handle of his harness tighter and tried to remember all the advice I'd gotten in self-defense classes. Never go straight home if you think someone's following you. Never give a stranger a map to your door. I kept my breathing slow, pretended to fumble with my bag at the next street corner. The man stopped too, just out of range, like he was waiting to see what I would do. Instead of heading toward my apartment, I gave Rex the command to continue straight, then made a sudden left around the block. My heart was pounding, but I focused on every sound. Footsteps echoing on the concrete, cars passing, distant music from a bar a few blocks over. The man changed direction too. His footsteps quickened for a second, as if he was worried about losing me, then settled back into that measured pace. We turned right, then right again, doubling back toward where I'd started. He followed every turn, never falling behind, never coming closer. No talking, no shouts, just that steady pressure at my back. I looped the block twice, keeping my head up, holding on to Rex, acting like I belonged there. Each time I checked over my shoulder, I caught the faint echo of his footsteps. No one else was out walking. I passed a closed grocery, a boarded-up storefront, and a little laundromat with the lights off. My skin crawled. There was no doubt now. The man was following me on purpose, matching my movements exactly. I felt Rex start to get antsy, his hackles rising. I kept walking, steady, not letting on that I'd noticed. But my mind was racing, counting my options, planning my next move. I ducked down a side street, feeling Rex tense beside me, and slipped into a narrow alley between two tall Victorian houses. The alley was barely wide enough for us both. The ground was littered with broken bottles, trash, the scent of garbage and something chemical in the air. I pressed my back to the brick wall, sliding down until I was half crouched in the shadows. Rex pressed up against my leg, silent and alert. I listened for footsteps, hoping he'd just walk past, but I could hear his shoes scrape the sidewalk. He didn't keep going. He stopped right at the entrance, just out of my view, and I could hear the soft jingle of metal. I fumbled my phone out of my pocket and, by muscle memory, activated Rex's harness camera. The screen was shaky in my hand as I aimed it back toward the street. I could see him now, illuminated in the thin glow from the alley's entrance. A middle-aged man in a gray suit, briefcase on the ground. He bent down, reached inside his bag, and pulled out several small metal tools. They glinted in the light, thin rods, hooks, and tension bars. My mind clicked. Lockpicks. He started organizing them in his hand, checking each one like he was used to this, like he'd done it 100 times before. My hands started shaking. This wasn't just street harassment. He wasn't just a creep. He was preparing for something, maybe to break into one of the houses, or even my building if he figured out where I lived. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound, and felt the bricks digging into my back. Rex didn't move except for a single twitch of his ear. The man stood there, glancing up and down the street, waiting. Every second stretched out longer than the last. Finally, he stuffed the tools back into his bag, crouched low, and peered into the alley. I held my phone up, hoping the screen wouldn't give us away. I watched him on the video feed. He moved like he was thinking about coming in after me. I slid my finger across my phone screen and opened the emergency app I'd installed last year. I tapped the silent call button. The screen shifted to text mode, dispatch. I typed fast. Blind. Hiding. Man outside alley. Looks like break-in tools. Please send help. Within seconds, a reply popped up. This is 911. Stay calm. Police en route. Officers 7 minutes away. Stay hidden if possible. I glanced back at the video. The man was pacing at the alley entrance, checking the street, like he was weighing his options. His face was still blank, totally focused, and he kept looking back and forth from the alley to his phone. I could see him reading messages, typing something, then slipping the phone away. Rex stayed glued to my leg, trained not to make a sound or move unless I told him. The alley was so quiet I could hear my own heart beating. Somewhere, a siren sounded in the distance, but it faded quickly. I kept glancing at the countdown on my phone. 6 minutes. 5. The man leaned forward, finally stepping just into the shadows, but stopped again. He looked around, maybe realizing he was visible from the main street if a car drove by. I held my breath, barely daring to move. The only sound was a drip from a busted gutter and the low hum of the city. For a few seconds, the man just stood there, indecisive. Then he straightened up, stuffed his hands into his pockets, and walked away at a fast, controlled pace. I waited another 30 seconds, watching the camera feed, before letting out a slow breath. Rex finally relaxed a little. I typed another update for the dispatcher. He just left, still hiding. Please advise. They replied instantly. Stay put. Officers arriving in 2 minutes. I pressed my back against the wall, listening, my whole body tight. I counted the seconds as cars passed out on the main street. 1 or 2 people walked by, but nobody stopped at the alley entrance. When the patrol car finally rolled up, I could see the red and blue lights flickering against the alley bricks. The 2 officers stepped out, calling my name and announcing themselves. I waved my phone, careful to keep Rex calm as we stepped out. The air felt freezing. They asked me to describe what happened and checked the alley, shining their flashlights over every scrap of trash and broken glass, looking for anything the man might have dropped or left behind. I replayed everything, from the ride on the L to the moment he'd stood there with those tools. The officers listened closely, asked a few more questions about what he looked like, how he moved, what he was carrying. When they finished checking the area, one of the officers knelt down beside me. He told me quietly that there had been a string of similar reports in the last month. Women, mostly, being followed home from the train or the bus, sometimes in pairs, sometimes by one guy like this, always hanging back and watching. They'd learned people's schedules, followed them for a few days, and then tried to break in when the victims weren't home. The officers said it was smart not to go home, that I'd probably avoided something a lot worse. They advised me to change up my route and the time I left work, at least for a couple weeks, and if I ever saw the man again, to call 911 immediately. I got a ride home from the officers. I called my building's management and told them what happened. They promised to check the security cameras and send out a warning to all residents. That night, I sat in my living room with Rex at my feet and checked every window and door, then did it again. I kept thinking about how normal everything had seemed on the train, how easy it was for someone to blend in, and how quickly things could turn dangerous. The next day, I changed my schedule, took a different train, left at a different time. Every step home, I listened for footsteps behind me, watching shadows, trusting Rex, trusting my instincts. I realized that night that you never really know how close you are to danger until it's right on top of you, and that it's better to act on a hunch than ignore what your instincts are screaming. I always trust Rex, but from then on, I started trusting myself too. When I was 22, I worked as a manager's assistant in a business center in downtown Chicago. My job was boring but steady, mostly helping out the building manager, printing paperwork, answering calls, sometimes running errands for tenants on the upper floors. The days were long, but at least the office was clean and right by the river. That Thursday, I had to stay late because of the quarterly reports. Usually, I would leave by 6:30, but I got stuck fixing a spreadsheet that wouldn't balance, and my boss kept asking for new numbers. I didn't look up until it was already dark outside, the lights in the building flickering as the janitors started on the floors. My eyes felt heavy from staring at the computer all day. I finished my last email and shut everything down, just wanting to go home. I was the only one left on the whole floor by the time I packed up my things, turned off the lights, and locked the door behind me. Outside the lobby, the city was still alive. It was past 9 p.m., but the sidewalks in this part of downtown never really emptied, not even late. I crossed the street and stopped under the streetlights at the bus stop, still in my office clothes, my messenger bag slung over one shoulder. The sky was a dirty orange, buses hissing as they pulled up to the curb every few minutes. Office workers in shirts and slacks hurried by in small groups, some of them laughing, heading to the bars or the restaurants lining the block. A couple of people in suits checked their watches, waiting for taxis. The street was noisy, but there was a certain order to it, everyone moving with purpose, talking on phones or looking straight ahead. I felt a little bit out of place sitting on the cold metal bench by myself, but I was just too tired to care. I pulled out my phone to check the bus schedule, wishing I'd left earlier. While I was scrolling through the transit app, I heard footsteps slow down in front of me. I barely glanced up as a middle-aged man in a wrinkled button-down shirt and old jeans came over and dropped onto the bench, close enough that his arm brushed mine. There was plenty of room, but he picked the spot right next to me. I glanced at him for a second. His hair was slicked back and thinning, his face unshaven, with sweat on his forehead even though it wasn't hot out. He sat heavy, his shoulders sagging, and didn't seem to notice me looking at him. I kept my phone out, pretending to be busy, but I was aware of him in that way. You notice someone who's a little off in a crowded place. He smelled sour, like sweat and cigarettes, and he kept sighing loudly, shifting his weight so the bench creaked under us both. After a minute, the man leaned over and started talking at me, his voice rough and too loud for the crowded street. He reeked of beer, the sour stench filling the space between us. He started right in with complaints, saying, "My boss is a prick, you know? Whole place is going under. Nobody there knows what the hell they're doing." He paused to sniff, then kept rambling about his job, his problems, how he should have been promoted years ago, how his co-workers were all idiots. He didn't look at me as he talked, but he made no effort to lower his voice, words slurring just enough to show he'd been drinking a while. I nodded a little, staring down at my phone, but he didn't need any response to keep going. He started cursing, his hands moving as he talked, waving a half-crushed soda can for emphasis. Without warning, he reached over and put his hand on my shoulder. His palm was clammy, and I jerked a little, pulling away as politely as I could. I shifted to the other end of the bench, putting some space between us. The city noise felt sharper all of a sudden, the headlights of cars swinging past and the drone of traffic making it hard to focus. He just scooted closer, his thigh pressed up against mine, closing the gap as if he hadn't noticed I'd moved. He kept talking louder, voice rising over the traffic, spitting complaints and bad jokes. Every minute or so, he would lean over again, grabbing at my wrist, squeezing my hand as he made some bitter point. I tried to pull my arm back, but he gripped harder for a second before letting go, looking out at the street like nothing was wrong. I looked around, hoping maybe the next bus would show up, but it was still a few minutes away according to my phone. I felt trapped on the bench, surrounded by people but with nobody really paying attention. Cars rolled past, people kept walking by, but nobody stopped or looked over at us. I thought about standing up and walking away, but I didn't want to make a scene. It was a busy intersection, and I felt like if I just waited a minute longer, he'd get bored and leave. But the man kept getting bolder, his voice slurring more, his hand reaching over more often, squeezing my arm, then letting go and laughing at something in his head. I sat frozen, my back pressed into the far edge of the bench, my eyes on the streetlights, trying to look like I was just waiting for my bus and not about to bolt. His behavior was getting worse by the second, and I was starting to get scared of what he might do next. The man's grip tightened on my wrist, his fingers digging in enough that I felt the pressure through my sleeve. He leaned closer, breath heavy with alcohol, and said, "You look like you need a drink. Let's go. I know a place right down the street. They got good prices. We'll have a couple. Talk about work. Come on." I tried to pull my hand back, but he squeezed harder, his thumb pressing into the side of my hand. He kept repeating, "Come on, just one drink. Don't be rude. We're both alone, right? What's the big deal?" His voice was getting louder, attracting a few glances from people walking by, but nobody stopped. I tried to twist away, saying I had to get home, but he just laughed and said, "It's not that late. You can text your friends and tell them you're with me now." I looked up and down the street for anyone who might help. A group of young professionals, 3 women and 2 men in crisp shirts and lanyards, came out of a glass office building across the intersection. They were talking and laughing, and for a second I made desperate eye contact with one of them. A woman in a blazer who looked right at me, then quickly looked away. They kept walking, not even pausing. The man yanked on my arm again, standing up as if to pull me with him. "Come on, don't be like that," he muttered, his tone suddenly turning mean. He leaned in, his face close to mine, and hissed, "Don't embarrass me out here." He started shuffling sideways, trying to drag me off the bench. I was stiff, frozen, but I didn't want to fight back and escalate things with so many people around. Cars kept pulling up to the curb, headlights sweeping over us, but nobody paid attention. My heart was pounding, every second stretching out. I was about to shout for help when suddenly, out of nowhere, a woman about my age stepped out of the crowd and walked straight up to us. She had a short brown bob, a business suit, and a purposeful stride. She didn't even look at the man. She locked eyes with me and gave a huge bright smile like she was greeting a close friend. "Jess, finally. Everyone's already waiting for us at the restaurant. It's Mike's birthday, remember?" Her voice was cheerful but direct, and she reached for my free arm. I hesitated only a second before she gripped my elbow with surprising strength and started pulling me up from the bench. The drunk man's hand slipped off my wrist as she stood between us, putting her body in the way. He looked confused, eyes darting from her to me, mumbling, "Who's this? I'm talking to her. We're going to a bar." The woman ignored him completely, steering me away, repeating, "Come on, we're late. Mike's going to be so mad." She practically dragged me down the sidewalk, her arms still looped through mine. We walked fast, the city lights flashing past us, the noise of the street washing over. I glanced over my shoulder, but the man hadn't followed. He stood by the bench, looking back and forth as if he couldn't decide what to do. I didn't say anything for the first block, just kept walking quickly, trying to match the stranger's pace. We turned a corner and the bus stop was out of sight. Once we were safely away, she slowed down and let go of my arm. We stopped near a taxi stand under a street lamp. She turned to me and said quietly, "Are you okay? He was grabbing you and you looked terrified. I figured you needed an out." She tucked her hair behind her ear, still scanning the street behind us. She explained that she worked in a nearby office and recognized me from the building lobby a few times. She'd seen the whole thing from across the street, watched as the man kept touching me, and decided to step in. "Sorry if I startled you. I just thought you needed a reason to get up," she said. I nodded, still catching my breath, and thanked her. She smiled, a little awkward now that the danger had passed, and pulled a business card from her purse. She wrote her cell number on the back and handed it to me. "If you ever need help or someone to wait for the bus with, text me. Seriously, I'm here late sometimes too, and it's always better to have a buddy." I slipped the card into my bag, still a little shaky. She offered to walk me to my train or wait for my bus, but I said I'd take a taxi home that night. We became friends after that, texting the next day to check in. She was smart, funny, and always down to split a cab after work if either of us was stuck late. After that night, we sometimes coordinated our commutes and met at the bus stop on purpose, just in case. We talked a lot about how easily things could have gone differently, how in a crowd, you can still feel invisible, how one person deciding to act can make all the difference. That experience made me much more aware of my surroundings, but it also showed me how important it is for people to look out for each other, especially women. Even just pretending to know someone, stepping in for a stranger, can completely change the outcome of a dangerous situation. I never saw the drunk man again, but I never forgot how quickly things went from normal to threatening, and how lucky I was that someone decided not to walk past. When I was 16, my aunt took me to this huge shopping complex outside town. She wanted to buy a new laptop, and there was this place about an hour away with way more options than anywhere local. We left right after breakfast on a Saturday. The drive felt long, mostly highway, and then a bunch of strip malls before the main building. The parking lot stretched in all directions. It was the kind of place where you had to memorize which section you left the car in, or you'd never find it again. Inside, the complex was all bright lights and glass storefronts. It was built like a giant rectangle with 4 levels. Each floor had wide open walkways and high railings you could look over to see the shops on the next floor down. The air smelled like soft pretzels and fried chicken from the food court. There were stores everywhere and people in every direction, but nothing felt crowded because of how big it was. My aunt led the way straight to the electronics store. She walked fast and seemed like she had a plan. When we got inside, she pulled out a little notepad from her purse with 3 different laptop brands and prices written out. She was one of those people who had to check everything before she bought anything, so I knew she'd be a while. I hung around with her at first, looking at the phones and gadgets, but it got boring pretty quick. She waved me away after a few minutes, saying, "Go do your thing. Meet me back here in an hour, okay?" She handed me a folded 20 and told me to grab some lunch if I wanted. I left the electronics store and headed out toward the main walkway. The escalators were lined with signs for stores on each floor. I took the one going up, standing still and watching people pass by in the opposite direction. The second floor was mostly clothes and home goods, and I almost got off, but remembered there was a bookstore 2 floors up. The ride gave me a good look at the big glass walls facing the parking lot, full of sunlight and the sound of people talking everywhere. At the 3rd floor, I stepped off and followed the map signs. The bookstore was right at the corner near the escalator. It had giant windows on 2 sides and a big red banner about summer reading. There were tables stacked with new releases right near the entrance and shelves for different genres along the walls. I felt a little relief walking in. The store was quieter, cooler, with that new book smell. I made my way straight to the fantasy section. They had a display for the latest bestsellers, and I picked up a thick paperback with a dragon on the cover and started reading the back. I drifted between shelves, looking at the covers and checking out the staff picks table. There were only a few other people browsing, mostly older women and a mom with 2 little kids who kept pulling random books off the lower shelves. Everything felt normal. I found a book I'd been wanting to read and flipped through the first few pages, losing track of time for a bit. Then I noticed movement in the next aisle over. A guy in a gray business suit was standing there. At first I thought he was just another shopper, maybe waiting for someone. He looked maybe mid-40s, hair cut short, carrying a leather briefcase in one hand. He had a clean-shaven face, and he stood very still, almost stiff, like he was on break from an office somewhere. He was turned toward the books, but after a second I realized he was watching me. Not the way most people glance around. His eyes were fixed on me, following as I moved along the shelf. I tried to ignore it, picking up another book and pretending to read the back. When I slid a little further down the row, I saw him in my peripheral vision do the same, drifting just a few feet behind, pretending to look at book spines. I shifted to the next section, passing in front of the cash register where the clerk was typing something at the computer. I glanced back. There he was again, maybe 20 feet away, holding a book in one hand but never turning the cover toward himself. I put the book back on the table and walked toward the nonfiction aisle, just to see what would happen. The guy didn't follow immediately, but after a few seconds, I caught him moving behind a shelf, lining himself up to keep me in view. My heart started beating faster, and I tried not to show that I'd noticed him. I thought maybe I was imagining things, but every time I moved, he shifted too. I decided to test it for real. I walked quickly past the registers toward the exit. I didn't look back at first, just kept moving, weaving through the tables of cookbooks and calendars. When I reached the glass doors, I risked a quick glance behind. He was following, still 20 feet back, but this time not even pretending to browse. He kept his eyes on me, walking at a steady pace. I felt my stomach drop. I'd heard stories about this kind of thing happening, but it had never happened to me. I stepped out of the bookstore into the wide hallway and walked fast, glancing at the crowd to see if anyone else noticed. The guy didn't speed up, but he came out of the store a few moments later, still trailing behind. I didn't want to wait around. I moved toward the escalator, forcing myself not to run, and got back down to the second floor. I walked in the direction of the electronics store, searching for my aunt in the crowds of people. I found her still standing by the rows of laptops, talking to a young guy in a blue polo shirt with a store badge. There were open boxes and price tags everywhere. She was asking about warranty details, pointing at one of the screens, and I just kind of hovered next to her. I didn't want to seem weird or make a scene, so I kept my mouth shut and pretended to be looking at the headphones and phone cases near the entrance. Every so often I glanced behind us, checking the other shoppers. Everything felt normal, just noise and people comparing electronics. But I couldn't relax. After a few minutes, I caught a glimpse of gray out of the corner of my eye. The guy from the bookstore walked in, not fast or anything, just casual, but he definitely looked around right away. He wandered past the TVs on the left, hands in his pockets. He picked up a remote control from a shelf and set it back down, eyes flicking toward us and away again. I looked down, staring at my shoes and pretending to tie one. My aunt asked if I wanted to get something from the food court before we left, and I shook my head. She took another 10 minutes to finish up, finally swiping her card and signing the receipt. The sales guy boxed up the laptop and handed her the bag. We headed toward the sliding doors. I stayed right beside her, gripping my phone tight. I looked back one more time and saw the man still pretending to browse, but now much closer to the entrance. Outside, the sun was blinding. The parking lot felt even bigger than before. I scanned the rows for our car. As we walked, I looked everywhere for the gray suit. I spotted him in the distance, across 3 rows of cars, unlocking a silver sedan with a key fob. He glanced at us before opening his door, watching for a second before getting in. I was shaking as we reached our car. I waited until both doors were locked before I let out a shaky breath and told my aunt about the man. I kept it short, just the facts: bookstore, electronics, following us, the car. She listened without interrupting, then started the engine and pulled out of the space. She didn't say much as we left the lot, but instead of heading straight for the highway, she drove across to the gas station right at the edge of the mall property. She parked right in front of the glass doors of the convenience store, under the lights, next to 3 other cars and a row of people getting gas. "Stay in the car," she said at first, but then changed her mind and told me to come with her. I could see the silver sedan turning out of the mall exit, then slowing down as it passed the gas station. The man looked straight at us through his windshield, just a quick glance, but it made my skin crawl. My aunt took out her phone and started texting as we walked inside. The place was bright, cold air blasting, music playing overhead. There were 3 people in line, a cashier in a green vest, and a security guard leaning by the coffee machines. My aunt didn't hesitate. She walked up to the guard and told him, quiet but serious, "Excuse me, we're being followed by a man from the mall parking lot. He's in a silver sedan outside." The guard listened, glanced through the window and asked, "Is he still here?" My aunt pointed to the far end of the lot. The sedan was parked by the dumpsters, engine still running. The guard picked up his radio and called the police. He asked us to stay inside until they arrived. We stood by the windows, pretending to browse snacks. The silver sedan sat there. Driver's side window rolled down just enough to see the outline of the man inside. He didn't get out, didn't do anything, just watched. I tried not to look at him. My aunt kept one hand on my shoulder, the other gripping her phone. After maybe 3 minutes, a police cruiser pulled into the gas station with lights off. The sedan immediately started moving, pulling out of the lot and turning left at the light. The patrol car followed for a few seconds, then turned on its lights and sped off after him. The guard told us to wait a little longer, just in case. A second police car arrived a couple minutes later. An officer came inside, asked us what happened, and took down everything we said. He was calm, wrote it all out, asked for descriptions. My aunt gave him the make and model of the car, the first 3 digits of the license plate, everything she'd noticed. They wrote my name and phone number down, then told us we could leave when we felt safe. I watched the street through the windows, but the silver car was gone. The drive home was quiet. My aunt kept checking her mirrors the whole way. My hands wouldn't stop shaking until we pulled into our own driveway. That night, I barely slept. Every time a car went by outside, I thought it was the silver sedan. 2 days later, a police officer called our house. He told my aunt they'd checked the security cameras from the mall and the gas station. They'd matched the license plate and description to a man who was already in their system, a convicted sex offender, out on parole for the last year. He'd been arrested that morning at his apartment, taken in for questioning, and charged with violating parole for approaching minors. The officer said he'd probably stay in jail for a long time. He told us we did the right thing by going somewhere safe and reporting it. After that, every time I was in a crowded place, I kept checking faces, watching people in case something like that happened again. Sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if my aunt hadn't listened, if she'd just shrugged it off and we'd gone straight home. But I don't think about it for long. My shift as a student advisor at Arizona State felt like any other night at first. I was a junior, so the job was just a way to cover rent and groceries, mostly walking the dorms and checking doors with my partner Jessica. The campus was always quieter after 10, and we were both half watching the clock, waiting for midnight so we could go back to our rooms. The hallway lights in the freshman dorms always flickered a bit, and the tile floor echoed with every step. I remember Jessica was yawning a lot, leaning on the front desk, scrolling on her phone, not really talking much. We were talking about what we were going to eat after shift, maybe microwave burritos from the gas station, maybe nothing at all. It was around 11:30 when the work phone on the desk rang. Not my cell, not the building phone, but the battered black work phone with a sticky emergency use only label on it. It never rang unless something was wrong. Jessica and I both stared at it for a second before she answered. I could hear the voice even though I wasn't holding the phone. A woman, or maybe a girl, crying hard, trying to talk, saying, "Help, please, help me," in between gasps. The words came out all tangled and desperate. I could hear something slamming in the background, maybe a door or a hand on a table. Then it went dead. I saw Jessica looking at the screen. The call lasted maybe 10 seconds, probably less. She showed me the screen. It said campus security. I asked her if she was sure, and she just nodded. The number was saved as Campus Security Dispatch, which was strange because they always radioed us, not called, and never on this line. Jessica tried to call back right away, but it just rang and rang. She hung up after a few rings and looked at me. I asked if she thought someone was pranking us, but she shook her head. The crying didn't sound fake, and the panic in the voice didn't feel like someone making a joke. We sat in silence for a minute. I looked through the glass window at the empty lobby. The vending machines hummed, and the big wall clock ticked, slow and too loud. I said maybe we should call the real campus security number. Jessica already had her phone out, scrolling for the dispatch number in her contacts. She called, put it on speaker, and waited for the night dispatcher to pick up. He sounded tired. She explained that we'd just gotten a call from campus security, but it wasn't on the radio, it was on the work phone, and the person on the other end was crying, saying they needed help. She read out the number. There was a pause on the other end. The dispatcher said, "We haven't had any emergency calls tonight." He sounded confused too, almost annoyed, like we were wasting his time. Jessica said, "The call came from your line though, it said campus security." The dispatcher said, "We haven't used that number in 6 months. That line belongs to the admin building. It's under renovation. Nobody should be there, and nobody uses that number anymore." Jessica looked at me. She asked if maybe there was someone in the admin building, but the dispatcher said, "Nobody's scheduled. Nobody should be inside. The building is locked, and there's no security post there at night." I tried to remember if anyone ever went over there after hours, but I couldn't think of a reason. The dispatcher's voice dropped a little. He said, "You two got a call like this before, right?" I remembered, suddenly, yeah, we had. It was 3 months ago, almost the same time, same shift. Same voice, crying for help, cut off after a few seconds. Back then we'd reported it. Our supervisor had shrugged it off, said it was probably a glitch, maybe someone hacking the phones. Nothing had come of it. But now it was the same number, the same voice, and still nobody had any answers. Jessica and I didn't say anything for a while. The desk phone sat between us, screen still glowing, as the dispatcher told us, "If you hear anything else, call us right away. Don't go near the admin building. We'll send someone out to check." She hung up. We listened to the silence, both of us glancing at the front doors, waiting for something else to happen. Jessica stood by the door, holding her arms, not wanting to go in, but I said we needed to check. If something was actually wrong, and we ignored it, we'd never be able to live with it. I took out my phone and called campus security again, told them we were about to enter the admin building because the front door was open, and we had a work flashlight. The dispatcher told us to be careful, that they'd send a patrol car, but it would take time. I hung up, and we both stepped into the lobby. The place smelled musty, the air heavy, like it hadn't been opened for months. Our footsteps echoed off the tile. All the old furniture was covered in sheets, thick with dust. The only sound was the hum of the flashlight when Jessica clicked it on and swept the beam across the floor. We walked straight to the front desk, half expecting someone to jump out, but it was just empty. I could see footprints in the dust on the tile, leading down the main hallway. The glass doors to the offices were mostly closed, but the light from the flashlight caught on smudges and handprints. Jessica kept whispering that we should leave, but I kept going, turning down the hallway to the old student affairs wing. The whole building was dark, silent except for the low buzz of our shoes scuffing the dirty linoleum. It felt colder in there than it should have. The only light was from our flashlights and a little glow coming from an exit sign at the end of the hall. At the end of the hall, in the old student affairs office, we found a table with an office phone on it. The phone was still plugged in, cord tangled and dusty, but when Jessica picked up the receiver, there was a dial tone. She looked at me, then pressed in our work number. After a second, my phone in my pocket started to ring. I pulled it out and saw the same campus security ID on the screen. Jessica hung up. We just looked at each other. Whoever had been calling us had been using this phone. The office didn't look like anybody had been there recently, but in one of the corners was a crumpled sleeping bag and some food wrappers, fast food cups, and an empty water bottle. It didn't smell great. We checked a few more rooms. One had a pile of old textbooks, another had some empty cans and a plastic bag full of clothes. It was obvious someone had been living there for at least a few days, maybe longer. It wasn't just a place to sleep. It looked like they were trying to stay hidden. Jessica said, "Let's call security now." I agreed. We stepped back into the hall and called the dispatcher, told him what we'd found. He said to stay put, that a patrol would be there in a few minutes. We waited by the front door, not talking, watching for movement. The only sound was the faint buzz of the streetlights outside and the distant echo of cars on the highway. The security officers showed up fast, flashlights and radios out, asking us to wait outside while they searched the rest of the building. They didn't find anyone inside, but one officer said the basement door had a busted lock, easy to pry open. There were more food wrappers and some blankets down there. It looked like whoever had been inside left in a hurry. The officer said it was probably someone homeless using the place as shelter. The phone was an old line that never got disconnected when the building was shut down. The officer figured the person was trying to call for help, maybe by accident, and when we answered with unfamiliar voices, they panicked and hung up. Security locked up the building tight after that, fixing the locks, checking all the windows. They said they'd send someone by every night for a week, just to be sure. We never got another call from that number. Nobody ever came forward. After that, Jessica and I were more careful on rounds, always checking the doors, never ignoring anything weird. I thought about how scared we'd been, thinking something terrible was happening, when it was just someone looking for a place to sleep and maybe a way to call for help. I realized that not every scary situation has a monster in it. Sometimes it's just a person trying to get by, and the unknown is what makes it feel dangerous. After that, every time I walked past that building, I looked at the locked doors and remembered how close we'd been to making up a ghost story out of nothing. We finished the semester, did our shifts, and never talked much about it again, but I still checked the phone lines, just in case. When I was 10, my family took a trip to this big water park outside Atlanta. We'd never done anything like that before. My mom packed a cooler with sandwiches and juice boxes, and my dad had already scoped out a spot near the main entrance before we even paid to get in. It was crowded, noisy, people everywhere, families dragging towels and floaties, the smell of chlorine and hot asphalt heavy in the air. My sister Emma was 12, old enough that she was constantly annoyed about being stuck with me, but still too young to be left alone, so we were told to stay together, at least at the start. We left my parents near their lounge chairs, their bags stacked around them, and pushed through a mess of other kids and parents toward the water slides. Emma wanted to try the tallest slide first, but the line was so long it wrapped all the way around a fake rock wall, so we decided to start with the lazy river. The lazy river looked easy enough. Slow current. Dozens of kids drifting by on tubes, some adults hanging their legs off the sides. We grabbed a couple of blue inner tubes from the big pile near the stairs, stepping around puddles and cold drops that dripped from the rails overhead. The water was colder than I thought, and I almost slipped on the first step. Emma just shook her head and told me to keep up. We pushed off from the wall, letting the current take us, weaving between groups of teenagers and families with toddlers squeezed in between them. For a while, it was fun. There was music playing from hidden speakers, and we passed under bridges where kids splashed down from slides above. But after a minute or two, the current started to get stronger. There were these little jets in the corners that sped everything up. At one turn, a family bumped into us, and I spun around, lost sight of Emma for a second. She was a few feet ahead, then behind, then suddenly gone. Her tube sucked around a curve while I drifted past a bunch of bigger kids splashing each other and yelling. I called her name once, but nobody noticed. For a minute, I just let myself float, figuring I'd see her again at the next bend. The river made a big loop around the whole park. Sooner or later, we'd end up in the same spot. I didn't feel scared yet, just annoyed. My hands started to wrinkle from the water. I could still see the entrance every once in a while, the cluster of beach towels and umbrellas, but Emma was gone. The crowd kept changing. I passed groups I hadn't seen before, some laughing, some quiet, a couple of teenagers messing around and almost tipping each other out of their tubes. I started to get a weird feeling, not really worried, just like something was off. The sun kept ducking behind clouds, and every so often, a whistle blew and a lifeguard yelled at someone for standing up or pushing another kid. I started paddling with my hands, trying to speed up, looking for Emma's brown hair or her blue swimsuit. After another full loop, still nothing. I floated past the exit stairs, half expecting her to be waiting, arms crossed, mad. She wasn't there. I tried to remember what my parents said. Meet back at the lounge chairs if you get separated. But the river was packed, and it didn't seem that hard to just keep floating and try again. I didn't feel scared, but I did start to notice the way some of the older kids looked at me. Me, by myself, smallest kid in the crowd, clinging to the edge of my tube. I stopped laughing at the music. Every few minutes, the current would grab my tube and spin it sideways, or someone else would bump me and keep going, not even looking back. My arms ached from trying to paddle upstream. I drifted under a bridge, and for a second, everything felt quieter, like I was the only one there. That's when a man's hand grabbed my tube and held it steady. I looked up and saw this middle-aged guy, thick arms, sunburned shoulders, a faded blue cap pulled low over his eyes. He smiled, said, "Hey there, you look like you need a bigger tube." I didn't say anything, but he kept talking, reaching down to help me climb onto a double inner tube he'd pulled over from the side. His hands were rough, big knuckles, nails bitten short. I told him I was fine, but he just laughed and said, "It's easier with two, trust me. I used to bring my own kids here all the time." He settled into the tube next to me and started talking, mostly about how he'd noticed me floating by myself, how he remembered when his kids were my age. He asked if I wanted to go around the river again or if I liked the big slides. I just shrugged, not sure what to say. He started telling me about his house, not far from here, on a lake. Said he had jet skis and a boat, and a big room full of video games and snacks. "Kids love it out there," he said. "All the newest games, you wouldn't believe it." He asked if I liked Mario Kart. I nodded, but I didn't say anything else. We floated past the lifeguard station, and I tried to look for Emma, scanning every face, hoping she'd see me with this guy and maybe come over. But I didn't see her. The man kept talking, never really stopping to listen to me. He asked if my parents ever took me fishing, if I liked camping, if I liked swimming in lakes instead of pools. I just answered with short yes or no, hoping he'd stop. But he started listing all the stuff he had at his lake house: ATVs, a dock, even a paddle boat. "I bet you'd love it," he said. "Maybe your sister too, right? You got a sister?" When we reached the exit, he helped me out of the tube, holding my arm as I climbed up the slippery steps. I tried to move away, but he held on, smiling. "Come on, let's go try the big slides," he said. He pointed toward the tallest slide in the park, the one Emma and I skipped earlier because of the line. "It's the best ride here, you can go double." I tried to say I needed to find my sister, but he waved me off, said, "We'll just go once, then you can look for her. The line goes fast." He led me over to the base of the slide, steering me around other people, one hand on my shoulder. I glanced around, searching for Emma, for my parents, for any face I recognized. But the crowd was thick, and loud. The man kept talking, telling me about the view from the top, how you could see the whole park, even the parking lot. "Don't be nervous," he said. "I'll go with you." I hesitated, but he was already moving forward, guiding me into the line, standing right behind me so close I could smell his sunscreen and sweat. He asked where my family was sitting. I mumbled something about the entrance, and he nodded like he already knew. We inched forward with the crowd, people laughing and shouting behind us, the line pressing in tighter. I looked up at the huge slide, the bright blue plastic curving into the sky, and wondered how long it would take to find Emma. The man nudged me forward, still talking about his lake house, and I tried not to listen as we got closer to the front of the line. While we waited in line for the big slide, I noticed the man kept shifting his weight back and forth, glancing around like he was waiting for someone or something. He tried to keep talking about his lake house, dropping little details about boats and games and how much fun I'd have there. Every so often he'd crouch down like he was looking for something in the water, then suddenly dive all the way under. The water wasn't even that deep, just enough to cover his back, but I felt his hands bump into my legs. The first time I jumped, thinking maybe it was an accident, but it kept happening. I tried to move forward in the line, standing closer to the family ahead, but he kept reappearing beside me, always grinning, acting like nothing was weird. He'd laugh, say, "Just playing around. Don't be so serious, kid." I tried to ignore him, staring ahead at the stairs to the top of the slide, but my skin prickled every time I felt him get close. The line moved slow. People kept pushing past, some parents carrying little kids who were crying or begging to go back to the lazy river. I kept looking around for Emma, for anyone I knew, but all the faces started to blur together. The man tried to nudge me back in line when I shifted to the side, telling me it'd be our turn soon and we didn't want to lose our spot. I wanted to tell him I didn't want to go on the slide anymore, but the words got stuck in my throat. Then, out of nowhere, a couple stepped in behind us. The woman had sunglasses on, her hair tied up in a bun, and the man was holding a half-empty soda cup. They both looked at me and then at the guy next to me. "Hey, is everything okay?" the woman asked, glancing down at me and then back at the man. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. She crouched down a little so she was eye level with me. "Are you here with your family?" she said quietly. I shook my head. "I don't know him," I finally said, my voice small but clear enough to hear over the noise. The man's expression changed. He started to say something, but the couple stepped closer, blocking him from me. "Who are you here with?" the woman asked the man, her voice sharp now. He shrugged, looking away, and mumbled something about meeting friends, but he didn't make eye contact. The man with the soda stepped in front of me, putting his arm between us. The couple kept talking to the man, pressing him for details. Other people in the line were starting to stare. I just wanted to leave. I tried to step out of the line, thinking I could get away while everyone was distracted. Before I made it to the edge, the man reached out and grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, and he bent down, whispering, "We should stick together. It's safer." His hand was sweaty, fingers pressing into my skin. I pulled back, but he held on, insisting he was just helping, that kids shouldn't wander off alone in big places like this. My heart was beating so fast I felt like I might throw up. The couple behind us started raising their voices. "Let go of him," the woman yelled. "We're calling security if you don't let go right now." The man hesitated, his hand still wrapped around my arm, but as people started to turn and look, he finally let go. I stumbled away, half walking, half running toward the exit of the slide area. The man followed a few steps behind, weaving through the crowd. I looked over my shoulder and saw him, his face different now, tight, jaw set, eyes searching for something. I was scared, not sure what he'd do next. But I kept moving, squeezing between adults and kids, not looking back again. When I got near the exit, I broke into a run, nearly slipping on the wet concrete. I didn't stop until I saw the cluster of lounge chairs near the main entrance, the same spot where my parents were sitting when we first got there. I pushed through the crowd, dodging coolers and bags, until I saw my mom reading a magazine and my dad half asleep in his chair. I sat down on the towel next to my mom, shivering even though the sun was hot on my back. She looked at me and asked if I was okay. I just told her I was tired and didn't feel like swimming anymore. She asked if I wanted a snack, but I shook my head and sat there, knees pulled up, staring out at the water. I didn't tell my parents what happened. I didn't know how to explain it, didn't want to make a scene or get in trouble for leaving Emma. My dad offered to walk me back to the snack bar, but I told him I wanted to stay put. I watched people come and go, keeping an eye out for the man from the lazy river, but I never saw him again. My hands were still shaking a little. About an hour later, Emma showed up, hair wet and eyes rolling, saying she'd been at the kiddie pool and got a free popsicle from one of the lifeguards. She asked where I'd been, and I just shrugged, saying I got bored waiting for her. My mom fussed about us sticking together, but she didn't seem worried. I sat there for the rest of the afternoon, just watching people, staying close to our stuff. We packed up before the park closed, loaded the cooler back into the car, and drove home with the radio on, nobody talking much. I didn't think about the man for a long time. It was only years later, looking back, that I realized how close something bad could have happened. I thought about that couple stepping in, how they didn't ignore me when I looked scared. I never told anyone the whole story, not even Emma. But sometimes when I'm somewhere crowded and a stranger tries to get too close, I remember that day at the water park. I learned to trust that feeling in my gut, even when I can't explain why something feels wrong. I was lucky someone else noticed too. I had planned the trip for weeks. Me and 3 other guys from college rented a cabin up in Rocky Mountain National Park as sort of a way to blow off steam after finals. We all had big plans: hiking, fishing, nothing crazy, just a long weekend off the grid. But my last exam ended up being pushed back because of a snowstorm, so I had to stay in town an extra day while everyone else drove up without me. By the time I was finished, it was already late afternoon, and the sun was dropping fast. I checked the group chat and let them know I'd be rolling in the next morning, but I still wanted to get as close as I could that night. If I started early the next day, I'd only lose a few hours with everyone. I packed up my gear in the back of my old Subaru, filled the tank, and started the drive up into the mountains as it got dark. The highway was mostly empty. The last bit of sunset disappeared behind the peaks, and the temperature dropped every mile. I kept the radio on low and sipped coffee, mostly just thinking about how quiet it was compared to the city. About an hour from the park entrance, my phone lost service, so I just relied on the GPS I'd preloaded, double-checking the map taped to my dash at every turnoff. After passing the last little gas station, there was nothing but trees, the sound of the engine, and the black shapes of the mountains against the sky. The roads were clear but narrow, and when I finally reached the national park boundary, the only lights were my own. The last 5 miles to the cabin were the problem. The road turned to gravel, and then to what barely counted as a trail, just 2 tire tracks winding up the side of a ridge. It twisted through pine and aspen groves, following a creek, with drop-offs right beside the path, and only a few feet between the car and the trees. I drove slow, wincing every time a rock scraped the bottom of the car. After about a mile, I stopped, leaned out, and checked the road ahead with my flashlight. The darkness swallowed up the beam. If I kept going, I'd risk sliding into a ditch or missing a turn and rolling off the side completely. The only good sense I had told me to pull over and camp for the night instead of trying to make it to the cabin in pitch black. I turned off onto a little clearing a bit up from the stream. The spot was open enough to back the car in and turn around, just a patch of grass and some sand with the creek a little ways off behind a row of willows. I grabbed my tent, a small two-person one, and set it up close to the car so I could lock my extra stuff inside. The air was cold but dry, with the smell of wood smoke from old campfires and something like fresh earth by the water. I unpacked a cheap folding chair, lit a small camp stove, and made some noodles and tea. The woods were quiet. I could hear the creek rushing below, some distant bird calls, nothing out of the ordinary. The headlights caught the edges of the tent and the side of the car before I killed them. I left a lantern hanging from a tree branch so I'd have a little circle of light while I ate. By the time I finished, it was almost full dark. I cleaned up, washed my bowl in the stream, and made sure there was nothing out that would attract animals. The sky was clear, stars bright, and the cold made my breath steam when I turned my head. I felt relaxed, honestly. Maybe even better than if I'd made it to the cabin. I checked the zipper on the tent twice, walked the edge of the clearing with my flashlight to see if there were any signs of other campers, but the ground was untouched except for my own footprints and a few tracks from deer or elk along the water. I tossed my phone into my sleeping bag, knowing I wouldn't get any messages till morning, and sat on the log by the fire ring, staring into the darkness. It was silent, except for the creek and a breeze moving through the high branches. Every once in a while, I'd hear a single twig snap or the flutter of wings, but it was all normal sounds for the woods. I found myself watching the darkness between the trees more than I wanted to admit, just out of habit. I had camped alone before plenty of times, but the forest felt different at night, like there was more weight to the silence. I didn't let it bother me. I sat there until the chill started to get in my bones, then crawled into my tent, zipped myself up tight, and lay listening to the wind and the water until I drifted off. I woke up sometime later, not sure how long I'd been asleep. My watch said it was just after 9. I could see my breath in the beam of the little lamp clipped to the tent roof. For a minute, everything was quiet except for the steady sound of the creek. Then, while I was sitting up to grab a drink of water, I heard a crack from the trees to my left. It wasn't loud, just one sharp snap. I paused, listened. I figured maybe a branch had fallen, or maybe a deer was moving through the brush. I held my breath, counting to 10, but there was nothing. Then, just as I was about to lie back down, there was another crack, this time behind me and to the right. Closer. I unzipped the tent and shined my flashlight out in an arc, sweeping over the clearing, the car, and the start of the tree line. The light caught nothing but the same trunks and undergrowth. I listened, straining, but whatever it was, it had stopped moving. I stood up, walked a slow circle around my camp, checking the ground and the trees for any sign of movement, but there was nothing except the soft crunch of my boots in the dirt. Satisfied, I crawled back inside, zipped the door, and tried to settle in. A few minutes went by. Then it started again. A soft, careful crackle, like footsteps through dry leaves, circling the edge of the clearing. First from one direction, then another. The pattern felt too steady, never close enough to see, but always moving, always just far enough that when I went out to look, everything would go quiet. It would stop so suddenly it made me think maybe I'd imagined it. But as soon as I settled back into my tent, it started up again, tracing a wide arc around the fire ring and the edge of my little patch of light. I kept telling myself it had to be elk or deer. There were tracks by the stream, and animals came to water at night all the time. Still, the way the steps circled instead of coming straight through or running away set me on edge. I checked the time again, sat up with my back against my bag, and listened, gripping the flashlight. I held it ready, waiting for the sounds to stop, and after a while, the patterns started to get under my skin. I thought about calling out, but the words stuck in my throat. I sat, waiting for the next sound, the next step in the dark, every muscle tense. It got colder as the hours dragged by. The animal sounds faded, and the woods settled into a heavy silence. I lay awake, eyes open in the darkness, listening for the circling steps. At some point, just past midnight, the sound changed. I heard something soft, a foot scuffing against dirt, and then voices, low and urgent, drifting in from the direction of the creek. It wasn't loud, but I could make out the tone. 2 men. I froze, barely breathing, straining to listen. One was whispering fast, his words broken up by the wind, but I caught phrases. Cut it. Stash. By the bridge. He said midnight. The other answered in short, flat bursts. Just get it done. In and out. The words sounded clipped, bored, like this was routine for them. I heard a plastic bag rustle and the clink of something glass. I slid lower in my sleeping bag, not daring to move. The voices drifted closer, and then I caught the edge of a sentence. Something about quantity and drop-off. My stomach knotted up. This wasn't just hikers passing through or kids playing pranks. I tried not to panic. My tent was just a thin layer of nylon, nothing between me and whatever these men were doing. I could hear them moving along the edge of the clearing, their flashlights snapping off and on, little circles of white light darting through the trees. Then, suddenly, one of them stopped right outside. I saw the shadow of a hand on the tent wall, wavering in the glow from my lamp. The other man hissed, "Leave it, man." But the zipper at the base of my tent started to move, teeth slowly separating, the sound way too loud in the dead quiet night. I held my breath. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they'd hear it. My hands shook as I reached for my flashlight. I heard the zipper sliding up inch by inch, and then the man paused, maybe listening for movement. I didn't move. He waited, his shadow looming over me, and then I caught the glint of a blade, just a flash as he adjusted his grip. The second man was further off, just a dark shape near the tree line, glancing back and forth as if checking the area. The first man leaned in, and I saw the tip of the knife poke through the gap in the zipper, catching the beam from my lamp. I realized that if I didn't do something now, there'd be no second chance. I clenched the flashlight tight in my fist and shoved myself up, kicking hard at the tent door. It collapsed forward, tangling the man's arm and knocking him off balance. I burst out of the tent, shining my flashlight straight at their faces, yelling as loud as I could. "Hey! I'm calling the park rangers right now. They're already on their way." I tried to make my voice as steady as possible. "I have a radio. Backup's coming. You better run." For a second, they both froze, the beams from my flashlight blinding them. I saw the first guy's face, pale, stubbled, angry. The other cursed and turned, bolting into the trees. The man with the knife glared at me, then spat at the ground, his face twisted in frustration. "Screw this," he muttered. Then he was gone too, crashing through the underbrush. I stood in the middle of the clearing, shaking, listening to the sounds of them running, branches snapping, heavy footfalls fading into the distance. I waited, flashlight aimed where they'd gone, until the woods fell quiet again. My heart didn't slow down for a long time. I packed what little I could and dragged it close to the dying fire, sitting with my back to a tree and the flashlight in my lap, staring into the darkness. Every little sound made me jump. I thought about starting the car and just driving out, but I couldn't risk the road in the dark. I was trapped, waiting for daylight. When dawn finally came, I shoved my gear back into the car with numb hands, never taking my eyes off the woods. I checked the tent. There was a tear near the zipper, a dirty footprint by the flap, and the faint outline of a hand pressed against the nylon. I left the clearing without looking back, drove to the main trailhead, and locked the car, forcing myself to calm down before starting the hike to the cabin. The sun was up by then, making everything look harmless, but every time a branch snapped or a bird called, I flinched, half expecting those men to step out from behind a tree. The hike to the cabin felt endless. The trail twisted through stands of pine and open patches of rock, and I kept glancing over my shoulder. Finally, I saw the cabin up ahead. Just a small A-frame tucked under the trees, smoke coming out of the chimney. My friends were out front, unpacking gear and setting up breakfast. I dropped my bag and told them everything, my voice shaking. They listened, faces tight, not saying much until I finished. Then one of them, Ben, nodded and said, "We heard stuff like this happens. Dealers use these back areas to do their drops. Cops have been trying to shut it down for years. The park's too big. They can't cover it all." Another friend, Marcus, frowned. "You're lucky. If they'd thought you really had a radio, or if they'd called your bluff." He shook his head, not finishing the sentence. We all just stood there for a minute, looking at the ground, the mood ruined. I asked if they'd seen anything weird during the night, but they shook their heads. The woods were quiet up here, they said, but that didn't mean much. Later that morning, we made our way to the ranger station and reported what happened. The ranger on duty listened carefully, jotting notes and nodding along. "We get calls like this more than you'd think," he said. "We'll increase patrols, but honestly, there's not a lot we can do. Best you stay with groups, especially at night." He gave me a card, said to call if I saw anything else, and wished us luck. The rest of the trip was tense. Every night we double-checked the locks and took turns staying up late. I kept my flashlight and knife within arm's reach. When we finally packed up to leave, I glanced once more at the tree line before driving out, just to make sure no one was there. I never went camping alone in unfamiliar territory again after that. Even now, whenever I hear a branch snap in the dark, I remember that night and how close things came to going bad. Sometimes the biggest danger out in the wilderness isn't the wildlife, it's the people who don't want to be seen. When I was 21, I had just finished college, and I was living in a tiny studio outside Detroit, barely scraping by on whatever freelance work I could find. I had this old futon mattress on the floor and a plastic table for a kitchen counter, nothing else. The fridge rattled all night, but it was empty anyway. I remember counting out my last $5, the coins sticky with something at the bottom of my backpack, and thinking I could make them last until my next small paycheck. But by the third day, I was so hungry I couldn't sleep. I'd eaten the last packet of noodles at lunch. That night I kept rolling over, listening to the radiator pipes ticking, staring up at the ceiling in the dark. It was 1 a.m. when I finally gave up. My stomach hurt and my mouth felt dry. I pulled on jeans over my sweatpants, stuffed the crumpled $5 bill in my pocket, and checked my jacket for gloves. No gloves, but I didn't care. The cold hit my face as soon as I opened the apartment door, sharp, but not the kind that freezes your breath. I remember stopping to check the lock 3 times before walking down the short hall, out to the street. There was a light layer of frost on the grass, shining under the street lamps. The air smelled faintly of car exhaust, and something sweet, like wet leaves. The store was a 24-hour place, 2 blocks away, past small houses lined up on either side of the street. Most of the houses were dark, just the blue glow of a TV in one window or a porch light here and there. I walked fast, hands jammed in my pockets, eyes on the pavement. My shoes crunched on the grit left from old snow. At the corner, a single car rolled by, headlights sweeping over me and then gone. The sidewalks were clear but slick in places. Each streetlight cast a pale yellow ring on the sidewalk. The spaces between stretched out long and dark. I passed the elementary school, the playground silent, the chain-link fence throwing strange shadows. I glanced up at the bare trees moving in the wind and kept my head down. The neighborhood was quiet, not totally empty, but close. Every so often I heard a dog bark far away, and a train horn somewhere much farther off. My breath showed in the air in short puffs. I moved faster, partly to stay warm, partly because I was starting to feel uneasy. It was the kind of cold that crawled up your back, and my jacket was too thin for it. As I walked, I started thinking about what I'd buy. I had just enough for a loaf of bread and maybe something cheap to drink. That was the plan, in and out, no looking around. The idea of getting back to my apartment, locking the door behind me, and finally eating made me speed up. I kept glancing behind me, not because I expected trouble, but just because it was so late and empty. The only sound was my own footsteps on the pavement. I kept checking the windows as I walked. There was movement behind a curtain in one house, maybe someone up late watching TV. Farther down, a porch light clicked on, then off. I reached the halfway point to the store, passing under an old street lamp that buzzed softly. My hands had gone numb even inside my pockets. I rubbed them together and kept going. For a second, I stopped to check my phone for the time, but the battery was dead. The only light was from the next row of lamps ahead and the pale outline of my own breath. The night felt still, but not calm. Then, as I turned the corner by the small park, I heard it. Footsteps behind me, not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the quiet. At first, I thought maybe it was just my own shoes echoing off the houses. I slowed a little, listening. The steps continued, steady, close to the curb. I glanced over my shoulder, trying to look casual, and saw a thin man in a dark jacket about half a block back. He had his hands in his pockets, head down, walking in the same direction as me. At first, I thought he was just another late-night walker, but something about his pace felt off. Too even, too slow. I kept walking, not wanting to show I was nervous, but I could feel my shoulders tighten. I crossed to the other side of the street, past a row of empty driveways. As soon as I stepped into the crosswalk, I listened hard, waiting to hear if he would turn too. Sure enough, within a minute I heard his footsteps again, now on my side of the street, maybe 20 yards behind me. My heart started pounding in my ears. I tried to focus on the rhythm of my steps, but his were out of sync, sometimes speeding up, sometimes slowing down. I kept my head forward, watching the glow of the store's sign getting closer, but the man's shadow stretched longer behind me, keeping pace. I passed another dark house, the steps behind me growing louder, crunching the gravel where the pavement was broken. I sped up, trying to stay calm, but every time I glanced over my shoulder, he was closer. His jacket was zipped up high, and he was staring straight ahead, not looking at anything but the back of my head. My feet started to ache from walking so fast, but I didn't slow down. I was only a few blocks from the store now. I could hear the man's footsteps picking up speed, matching mine step for step. The sidewalk seemed to get narrower, the houses pressed in closer, fences and shrubs crowding the path. There were no more windows lit up, nothing to break up the darkness except for the blue neon glow from the store sign up ahead. I looked back again and saw him only a few paces behind me now, face blank, eyes fixed on me. The night felt even colder suddenly, and the sound of his footsteps grew louder, matching every move I made. The man behind me started calling out, his voice slurred and rough, like he'd been drinking. "Hey man, you hungry? You need some help? I got money," he shouted, his words sliding into each other, strange and off-key. I didn't slow down or look back. His offer didn't fit the situation at all. Nobody walks around at 1 a.m. offering strangers cash. The way he said it made the hairs on my neck go up. I pushed my hands deeper in my pockets, shoulders hunched, and kept my head down. He called out again, louder, rambling about knowing the area, saying his apartment was close, that I should come by. His speech made no sense, words running together, and it sounded more like a demand than an offer. I walked faster, my shoes almost sliding on the sidewalk. I didn't answer. I could hear his steps quicken behind me, the rhythm off and uneven. His breathing sounded heavy now, harsh and fast. My heart thudded in my chest as I picked up my pace. The street was dead silent except for the slap of his shoes and his strange, broken sentences. "Wait. I got food, man. You look hungry." His voice echoed across the empty street. I cut through a small parking lot, trying to put some distance between us. His footsteps came closer, then started running, pounding the pavement behind me. The panic hit hard then. I broke into a full run, breath coming in short gasps. I could hear his feet right behind me, chasing. I didn't look back, just focused on the neon lights of a gas station up ahead, cutting through the darkness at the corner. My lungs were burning and my side cramped as I sprinted across the last stretch of sidewalk and up to the gas station doors. I yanked the handle and stumbled inside, chest heaving, sweat freezing on my skin. I looked back over my shoulder. The clerk behind the counter, an older woman with short gray hair, immediately stood up, eyes wide. She didn't ask what I needed to buy. Instead, she asked if I was all right, voice calm but sharp, taking in my wild look and the way I kept glancing at the door. "There's a man following me," I said, voice cracking. "He was trying to stop me out there." I pointed through the glass. The clerk reached for the phone, already dialing. "You stay right here, honey. I'll call the police," she said, not taking her eyes off me or the entrance. I pressed my back against the cold drink fridge, hands shaking, as I watched the man stop at the glass doors. He just stood there, maybe 6 feet away, staring in. His face was pale, eyes flat, and he looked straight at me through the reflection of the store lights. He didn't try to come in, just watched for a long 30 seconds. His chest rose and fell hard. I saw his hands flexing at his sides, his whole body tense like he was deciding something. The clerk moved quietly to the door and locked it, then returned to the counter. We both watched as he finally turned, hands in his pockets, and walked off into the shadows down the street. She waited a moment, then came around the counter and handed me a wrapped sandwich and a bottle of water. "You look like you need this more than I do. It's on the house," she said. I took them, too shaken to argue. The sandwich was cold, but tasted like the best thing I'd ever eaten. She kept checking the doors, glancing at the security cameras. "We keep the doors locked after midnight for a reason," she said quietly. "You're not the first to run in here scared." I asked if she'd seen the man before. She nodded, lips pressed tight, and said there had been a few strange people hanging around lately, sometimes just watching, sometimes trying the doors. She talked while we waited, keeping her voice steady, and it made the wait less frightening. The police showed up fast, their cruiser lights bouncing off the glass. 2 officers came in, one talking to the clerk while the other asked me questions. I told them what happened, described the man, his voice, the way he followed me and tried to get me to come with him. They wrote everything down, took my contact information, and asked if I wanted to ride home. I agreed without hesitation. I thanked the clerk, grabbed the last bit of my sandwich, and followed the officers out. They drove me back to my apartment building, checked the street, and handed me a business card with numbers for local food banks and a community center that gave out grocery vouchers. "You shouldn't walk alone at night, not in this area," the older cop said before they left. I nodded, promised I'd be more careful, and watched the patrol car drive away before heading back inside. For days after that, I jumped at every sound in the hallway and double-checked the locks every time I left the apartment. 2 weeks later, I was carrying groceries up the stairs when my neighbor, a guy in his 30s who lived downstairs, stopped me to ask if I'd heard about the break-ins. He told me that someone had been robbing people on foot late at night, especially near the gas station and the 24-hour store. He said the cops caught a man the week before, right after he tried to mug another person at knife point only a few blocks from where I'd been. The description matched. The same jacket, same build, even the same slurred way of talking. I never found out what would have happened if I'd let him get closer or listened to his story about money. Nobody ever told me if he had a weapon that night. I was lucky. I started going to the grocery store during the day, no matter how late my work ran or how empty my fridge got. Sometimes I ordered delivery and paid the extra fee, just to avoid being out after dark. The memory of that man's voice calling to me and the way he stood staring through the glass has never really gone away. Even when money is tight, I don't risk walking alone late anymore. The cost isn't worth it. When I was 19, I got a job at this big logistics warehouse about 40 minutes from my parents' house. The building was basically just a huge concrete box with massive metal shelves stacked all the way to the ceiling. Everything echoed in there. Beeping forklifts, pallets dragging, radios turned up too loud. My shifts were either early mornings or evenings, nothing regular. And the team was a mix of older guys who'd been there forever and young temps like me. I was mostly just glad to have work, and the pay was better than fast food. About a month in, HR brought in a new intern. His name was Kevin. He looked maybe a year older than me, but still young. First thing anyone noticed was all the tattoos running down both of his arms, some black script, a spider web, one of those old-school daggers, and a barbed wire band that disappeared under his sleeve. His face was always serious, a deep frown even when he just walked through the break room. I figured he'd warm up, but by the end of the first week, everyone realized he wasn't going to be friends with anybody. Most people at the warehouse tried at least once to be polite. Even the grumpiest guys would say, "Hey man," when Kevin walked by. He didn't answer. At lunch, he sat alone in the corner by the back window, picking at his sandwich and staring out like he was waiting for something. On breaks, if a few of us hung out near the lockers, he'd stand by the loading dock or just walk circles around the far end of the lot, always looking like he was keeping an eye on things. He never even glanced at his phone, just watched. One time, I caught him scanning the faces of everyone in the break room one by one, not really making eye contact, but not missing anyone either. If you looked back at him, he'd just hold your gaze for a second and then go back to whatever he was doing. He worked fast though. I'll give him that. Didn't mess around, never slacked off, never missed a single box on the checklist. But he'd stack the crates like he was angry at them. Loud, too. Every time he set one down, it thudded, even the lighter ones. He never talked, not even about the job. Once, a supervisor asked him if he needed help with a heavy pallet, and Kevin just shook his head and kept dragging it. Even the forklift drivers started making jokes, calling him the ghost, but only when he wasn't around. Still, when he was near, nobody joked. If you walked by him, you felt it. His eyes would follow, not moving away until you were out of his line of sight. There was this tension every day that grew a little worse each shift he worked. It wasn't just me. Even people who'd been at the warehouse for years said he was different. I remember one afternoon when the fire alarm went off and everybody filed out to the back lot. Kevin was already there, leaning against the fence, staring back at the building like he was studying the windows for something. I tried to ask if he knew what happened, just to break the ice, but he didn't answer or even look at me. After that, I quit trying. He didn't want friends, didn't want conversation, didn't want anything except to do his shift and leave. The warehouse floor had big yellow lines marking the lanes where we were supposed to walk, but Kevin always cut through the racks, never followed the main paths. I'd see him weaving through stacks of boxes, silent and quick, popping up in random aisles. At first, I thought maybe he was just avoiding the supervisors, but sometimes it felt like he was avoiding us too, almost like he wanted to know where everyone else was at all times. He watched people. That's what everyone noticed. He didn't join in on anything. He just watched. After one of my evening shifts, I clocked out around 10 and made my way through the side door into the employee parking lot. It was mostly empty, just a few trucks, my old Civic, and Kevin's black Jeep, which was always parked on the far end away from everyone else. I got in my car, tossed my work gloves onto the passenger seat, and started the engine. The windows had fogged up from the heat inside, so I rolled them down a little and sat there for a minute, checking my phone and letting my brain cool off. As I pulled out, I saw Kevin walking across the lot, heading to his Jeep. He didn't even look at me, just got in and waited, headlights still off. I left the lot and turned onto the main road, thinking about getting home and eating something before bed. The drive was mostly empty streets and a couple stretches of industrial area. No traffic at that hour except for the occasional semi. About 3 minutes in, I checked my mirror and saw headlights behind me, kind of far back but moving steady. I didn't think much about it at first. There's only one road out of the warehouse. But when I got to the first light, I made a left toward the highway. The headlights made the same turn, a little slower. At the next intersection, I took a right onto a smaller road that ran past a row of shuttered machine shops and auto garages. The car behind me turned right too. I checked again and recognized the boxy grille and square lights of Kevin's Jeep. There was no one else around. I tried to shake it off, telling myself we both just lived in the same direction. The next turn was a curve onto a service road that most people didn't use unless they were going out toward the suburbs. I made the turn, and in my mirror, Kevin's headlights swung after me. It was too close to be a coincidence. He was maybe 3 car lengths behind, never speeding up or slowing down, just matching my pace. I kept driving, now hyper-aware of every streetlight and every stop sign. Each time I turned, his Jeep followed. The road got darker as I left the industrial area and headed into the quieter streets near the housing developments. I could see my neighborhood up ahead, the brick mailbox at the entrance, the row of porch lights glowing in the distance. Nobody from work ever came out this way. It was all families and cul-de-sacs, no reason for anyone to be there unless they lived there. I turned onto my street. Kevin's Jeep made the turn right after me. My hands felt tight on the steering wheel. I passed 2 houses, slowed down, and pulled into my driveway. Kevin kept going, rolling past my house real slow. I watched as he drove down to the end of the street, paused at the dead end, then made a wide, slow U-turn. He drove past again, never stopping, just glancing once in my direction before heading back out the way he came. I sat in my car for a few minutes with the engine running, watching his taillights disappear. I told myself it was just a weird coincidence, that he probably got lost or was just driving around. But the route to my house was specific. He had no reason to be there. I stayed in the car, watching the empty street, waiting until everything felt normal again before I finally went inside. A week later, I woke up in the middle of the night, sometime after 2 a.m. The whole house was quiet, except for this crashing sound coming from the garage. At first, I thought it might be the wind, or maybe the old garage door banging around. But then I heard footsteps, definite footsteps, and something metal hit the concrete. I grabbed my phone and crept down the stairs as quietly as I could. The light over the kitchen sink was still on, casting a weird glow on the hallway. My heart was racing and my legs felt shaky as I moved toward the back door that led into the garage. I peeked through the little window and saw the garage light on. Kevin was standing near the workbench, hunched over, wearing the same hoodie he wore at the warehouse. He had a screwdriver in his hand, and my dad's toolbox was wide open on the floor. He must have forced the side door, because I could see splinters where the frame had cracked. There was a backpack open by his feet with a few of my dad's power tools inside. Kevin froze when he spotted me. We just stared at each other for a second. His eyes looked wild and desperate. Then, without saying anything, he dropped the screwdriver in the bag and bolted for the side door, shoving it open the rest of the way. I watched as he ran into the backyard and jumped the fence, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't even think to chase him. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely dial the house phone. I woke up my parents and tried to explain what happened as we checked the garage. My dad walked around with a baseball bat, looking into every corner, but Kevin was already gone. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. They walked around, took pictures, dusted for prints on the door, and asked me questions about how Kevin might have known where we lived. I told them about the Jeep following me that night after work. They nodded and said sometimes people scout out houses for weeks before making a move. We barely slept the rest of that night, just sat around the kitchen table listening to every noise from outside. The next afternoon, the police called to say they had picked up Kevin. He was hiding in an abandoned building 2 miles from our house, still wearing his work clothes. They said he didn't resist. At the station, he admitted everything. He told the officers he'd overheard some of the older guys at the warehouse talking about my dad's small construction business, how he never paid for outside storage, and how he kept expensive saws, drills, and equipment in the garage. That was the only reason he applied for the warehouse job in the first place, to find out which workers had valuables worth stealing. He said he listened carefully at lunch and during breaks, picking up details about people's homes, schedules, and families. Then he'd drive by the houses to see how easy it would be to break in. The police said Kevin already had 2 theft convictions and wasn't even supposed to be working there without his probation officer's approval. They found out he had been watching our house for several days, learning when we left and when the house was empty. He told the police he'd planned to grab as much equipment as he could fit in his backpack and sell it quick for cash. That's why he broke in at night. The police said he got nervous when he saw me in the garage and panicked, dropping everything and running. It sounded like he had a whole list of potential targets from the warehouse, all based on things he'd overheard at work. Kevin was charged with breaking and entering, theft, and violating his probation. The judge sentenced him to 3 years in prison because of his record and the fact that he was already on probation for similar crimes. The whole thing was over in a few months, but it didn't feel over to us. My dad hired a company to put in a full security system, cameras, alarms, and reinforced locks on every door and window. He even changed the way he stored his tools, keeping anything valuable in a locked shed with a steel padlock. My mom started parking her car in the garage every night, and we all double-checked the windows before going to bed. I couldn't handle going back to the warehouse. Every time I walked in, I pictured someone else listening to my conversations, watching what I did, and wondering if they could use it against me. I quit that job and took a short-term gig at a grocery store instead, even though the pay was worse. After what happened, I stopped sharing personal stuff at work. No more talking about where I live, what my parents do, or what we keep at the house. I still catch myself checking the rearview mirror on my way home, making sure nobody's following me. The thing that bothers me most is how normal Kevin looked on paper. He just wanted quick money, and he figured out how to get it by listening for details people don't think twice about sharing. He didn't care about anyone except himself, and he used his job to find victims who trusted him just because he wore the same uniform. I never thought about how easy it is for someone to get hired just to scout for houses to rob. It made me realize that you can't ever assume people are just there to work, or that they're harmless because they keep to themselves. Now, I keep my family's information private, even with coworkers I've known for a while. I always check who's around before talking about anything personal, and I don't trust silence as much as I used to. That job taught me that you never really know what someone else is looking for until it's too late. When I was 18, I was getting treatment at a private psychiatric facility a little outside Houston, Texas, after a suicide attempt. The place looked like an old brick school from the outside, but it had a high-security fence all the way around and cameras on the corners. There were gardens and a small grassy courtyard in the center where we could walk or sit if we had a break between group sessions. It was supposed to be private. They always said nobody could come inside except for staff and approved visitors, and even then, only at certain hours. The fence wasn't just for looks either. It was almost 12 feet tall, metal, with these black mesh panels so nobody could see in from the outside, and they locked the gates with heavy padlocks every afternoon after visiting hours. During my second week, I went out into the courtyard after lunch. It was humid, sky overcast, the kind of sticky Texas summer day when the air itself feels heavy. There were maybe 4 of us out there, 2 sitting on a bench talking quietly, another guy kicking a rock by the flower beds. I remember walking slow because I didn't really want to go back inside yet. I was looking at the patchy grass, not thinking much about anything. Then I heard the chain link fence rattle, soft, almost like wind. I looked up, and there was this man standing on the other side of the fence, out by the trees. He had on a faded red baseball cap, sunglasses, and a dark windbreaker zipped up all the way even though it was so hot. He looked like he was in his late 40s, maybe older, clean-shaven, kind of heavy, with a camera hanging from a strap around his neck. Not just a phone either, but one of those big black cameras with a zoom lens. He didn't seem nervous or in a rush. He stood there, holding the camera steady, and started taking pictures of the building from different angles. It wasn't casual. He moved a little, stepped to one side, focused the lens, then clicked, adjusted something on the camera, clicked again. After a minute, he knelt down and snapped photos through the mesh, right at the windows on the first floor. I froze. The others didn't notice at first. I kept watching him. There wasn't supposed to be anyone out there. You barely saw cars drive past on that road, let alone people walking around with cameras. We were supposed to be safe from any kind of outside attention. I walked over to Nurse Linda, who was reading paperwork by the glass doors. I said, "There's a guy taking pictures." She looked up quick, followed my line of sight, and her face changed. She stepped inside and grabbed her walkie-talkie. Another nurse came out, stood at the doors watching. Linda told me, "You can go back inside now. I'll handle this." But I could still see out the window as I went in. The man in the baseball cap didn't leave. He stepped away from the fence, but only a few yards back, then took more photos and scribbled something in a little notebook. The whole thing gave me a bad feeling. It was intrusive, like he was seeing something he wasn't supposed to. Back in the day room, I sat by the window with my notebook, watching him. He didn't look in at me, but I could see his face was expressionless. The staff told us later it was probably just a real estate appraiser or an inspector, something like that. But nobody had said anything about that before, and we were supposed to be notified if there was going to be an outsider near the fence. At dinner, Nurse Linda said she'd seen the same man standing near the main entrance about an hour before, just standing there, looking in, holding his camera. That got some of the other patients worked up. There was a rule about privacy. Nobody wanted to be seen or photographed while getting mental health treatment. People came here to hide out from things, to get help where nobody could see them. Now it felt like maybe we were being watched. The man with the camera walked off eventually, disappearing into the trees. The staff double-checked all the doors and windows before lights out. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak in the hallway, and wondering who he was and why he wanted those photos. The next morning, there was talk about the man again. A girl from the women's wing said she saw him by the parking lot, close to where staff parked their cars, crouched down, pointing his camera at the therapy wing. A tech said he'd driven past the entrance just after sunrise and saw the same guy standing at the corner by the mailbox, writing in his notebook. People started to notice him everywhere. He wore the same red hat, sunglasses, windbreaker zipped up high, and kept the camera strapped to him. By the end of the first day, 3 different people said they'd seen him walking the perimeter, always staying just outside the fence, snapping pictures or writing things down. By the second day, it was making everyone nervous. I saw him from my room window late in the afternoon, walking slow along the fence near the staff garden. He'd take photos, then stop, look around, and jot things down. Some patients began closing their blinds and turning away from the windows. One guy started pacing the hallway, muttering that someone was spying on us, maybe a reporter or a private investigator. I overheard a counselor telling another staff member that the facility was supposed to be 100% private, that nobody should be able to get that close to the building, let alone with a camera. Staff started checking the fence line more often, walking out in pairs every hour. That evening at group, the tension was obvious. People talked about how unsafe they felt, like the privacy and safety of the place was just an illusion. One girl said she saw the man stand on a step stool near the far end of the fence, trying to get his camera up high enough to see in. A few of the older patients got visibly upset, saying they would refuse to go outside if the man kept coming around. The administration decided to file a complaint with the local police about trespassing and harassment. A couple of officers came by the next day to take statements, but by then, the man had already vanished for a few hours. Security was told to start doing extra rounds, checking the fence and making sure the gates were locked tight. The staff closed off the end of the courtyard facing the woods and made sure everyone kept away from the windows after dark. Still, almost every few hours, someone would spot the man again, this time on the far side of the property, peering in at the windows, or writing in his notebook under a tree, always just out of reach but close enough to make everyone uneasy. People stopped using the courtyard, stopped sitting by the windows, and some even started pulling their beds away from the wall. There was this heavy sense that our safe place was being watched, and nobody could say why or what would happen next. The first few nights after they started extra patrols, I barely slept. Ashley kept her bedside lamp on until almost sunrise. Around 2 in the morning, we'd both wake up to soft sounds outside the glass, shuffling, sometimes tapping, like something light touching the pane. At first, I thought it was tree branches, but the courtyard trees were far from our windows. One night, Ashley sat up suddenly and whispered my name. "Did you see that?" She pointed at the curtains. There was a faint white light, like a camera flash, quick and silent. I sat there, staring at the closed curtains, and saw another flash, even though it barely lit up the fabric. It was aimed right at our window. The next morning, Ashley told the nurse about what we saw. She looked tired too. That day, they put up new warning signs at all the doors, saying the police were patrolling the area and trespassers would be prosecuted. The staff started carrying radios everywhere, checking windows every hour. They brought in a company to install security cameras on all 4 corners of the building. Now, wherever you walked outside, you could see the little red light blinking, recording everything. Some patients started staying in the common room until bedtime, just to avoid the windows in their rooms. Even the courtyard was off limits some afternoons. It got worse for some people. One girl in the East Wing had a panic attack after she heard footsteps outside her window at midnight. Someone else swore they saw a man crouched under the kitchen window, looking in with his camera. Even people who didn't want to believe it before were now avoiding the windows, pulling down the shades, asking staff to check their rooms at night. The stress level in the whole building doubled. Group therapy became all about the fear and anger from being watched. We tried to talk about other things, but it always came back to the man with the camera and how helpless we felt. The administration said they were working with police to resolve the situation as quickly as possible. They handed out a flyer with numbers to call if we saw anyone outside. The security guard at the gate got a partner, and now both of them walked the fence with flashlights every half hour. Still, most of us stayed on edge. I woke up a few times to the sound of security boots on gravel or radios clicking on and off, but I never felt fully safe. Even the nurses started looking stressed, checking the doors over and over, making sure nobody was getting in or out without a badge. A week after the first incident, things finally changed. That afternoon, we were called to an emergency group meeting. The director stood in front, holding a piece of paper, and explained that the man had been arrested early that morning by local police. His name was Kevin Morgan, 38, a journalist from a newspaper in the city. The police found him outside the fence just before sunrise, camera and notebook still in hand, trying to look in through a crack by the maintenance shed. They charged him with trespassing and warned him about photographing patients without consent. The director told us that Morgan had said he was investigating psychiatric facilities for violations and improper practices. He said he was trying to get evidence for a story on local hospitals. The director was calm, but everyone could tell he was angry. He said the facility was filing a lawsuit to protect our privacy and stop this from happening again. They were also asking the newspaper to discipline the reporter for breaking the law and crossing boundaries. That evening, the staff let us know that Morgan's editor claimed they didn't know what he was doing and had suspended him while they did an internal investigation. The police took his camera, memory cards, and notebook as evidence. Management said that they would keep the extra patrols going, and the new cameras would stay up. For the first time in days, a few people actually sat by the windows, looking out, as if testing if it was finally safe. But most of us just felt relieved that it was over. Nobody talked much that night. You could feel a kind of heavy silence, like the whole place was trying to reset itself. In the days after Morgan's arrest, the mood started to shift. Security guards stayed near the gates and patrolled the fence. The cameras watched every corner. I saw staff double-checking visitor logs and keeping tighter control over who could come in. Patients went outside again, but only in groups and never near the back fence. It felt safer, but it was hard to forget what happened. Even when the staff said it was fine, I found myself glancing at the trees, making sure nobody was out there with a camera. Some people struggled more. A few wouldn't leave their rooms at all unless a nurse walked with them. Others talked about moving to a different facility, somewhere smaller or farther from the road. The whole thing changed how we saw the place. The privacy we thought we had was gone, and everyone realized how easy it was for someone determined to get close. Management met with us again and talked about patient rights, privacy laws, and the importance of reporting anything suspicious right away. They posted flyers in the halls about consent and confidentiality, with reminders that the law protected us from having our pictures taken or our stories used without permission. The director explained how the lawsuit was about more than just our safety. It was about protecting people in treatment everywhere from being exposed when they were most vulnerable. Eventually, things settled down. The security guards went back to their old shifts. The new cameras stayed, but the extra patrols stopped. Patients returned to the routines: therapy, meals, group sessions, short walks in the courtyard. The days got a little quieter again. But nobody forgot what happened. Even when the staff tried to reassure us, there was this underlying tension, like everyone was just waiting for another outsider to show up. I learned a lot from what happened that summer. Before, I never thought much about medical privacy or what journalists could do with photos or notes from a hospital. But after being watched, photographed, and followed while I was supposed to be getting better, I understood why those laws exist. I realized how important it is to speak up, ask questions, and demand protection for yourself and others when you're in a place like that. Most people outside have no idea what it's like to be that vulnerable. Some might even use it for a story or a headline. Now, even after leaving the facility, I pay attention to who's around me, who might be watching, who might want something for the wrong reasons. I know to ask about consent forms, about privacy policies, about how my information and image will be used. The whole experience showed me that you can never be too careful about protecting your rights, especially when you're already at your lowest. Privacy is more than just a rule. It's a shield, and once it's gone, you don't ever get it back the same way again.